A novel by William Crossley. Sideville. Part 1. The Barn House. Chapter 1. Alex Clegg stepped off the yellow blue bird school bus and onto the dark grey sidewalk beneath him. His dirty black school shoes slamming loudly against the hard concrete floor. Axel, a 15-year-old schoolboy, had nearly finished his first year of high school. There was just one day to go. He had dark brown hair, was very strong, and always pounded loudly when he walked. He turned to face the bus and waited for it to move so he could cross the street and begin the long journey home. Soon after, a friend of Axel's, Caleb Hatch, stepped off the bus, much quieter than Axel had done a few seconds earlier, and stood next to him. Caleb was also 15 years old at the time, also at the end of his first year of high school, and he was slightly shorter than Axel, but a lot muscular and much stronger. He had very light brown hair, so light brown it almost blonde, and walked much quieter than Axel. However, despite their differences, they were good friends. They waited for a few more seconds, as it was quite a popular bus stop, being near the main road. And eventually the bus accelerated off into the distance and continued its journey out of sight and down the steep hill. They looked left and then right, not fully concentrating to see any cars were coming, just doing it because they had always done it and because it was almost an automatic reaction. There were loads of crammed houses on either side of the road going on for miles. Eventually they crossed the road, side by side, stepped off the road onto the curb, turned right and began to ascend their way up the rest of the hill. They didn't exchange a word for quite a while and just walked together silently as they were absorbed into their own thoughts. Eventually one spoke. "Do you want to come out tonight?" asked Axel. They turned the corner and walked along a much quieter street. "Yeah, sure. I'll drop my bag off at home and meet you at the park." Suddenly Axel stopped, grabbed Caleb's shoulder, turned Caleb around to face him, and stared straight at him with excitement in his eyes as he replied, "How about the woods? Tonight?" "No, I'm not going to sneak out of the house at night just to go to the woods with you. No way!" Caleb immediately faced forward and carried on walking home, already forgetting that Axel had even asked him a stupid question like that. Axel reluctantly followed behind him, not bothering to say any more. He knew Caleb was just way too scared to go up to those woods, especially at night. What was he thinking, asking Caleb to go to the woods with him? This is a kid who's literally scared of anything. Of all the people, why on earth would he ask Caleb? Suddenly he bumped into Caleb. He stopped dead in his tracks and stared up at something. Axel turned to look, and as he did, Caleb spoke. "I've never seen anyone into that place before. I don't think I ever will." It was an old barn house that was mysteriously placed in the middle of a quiet village, and no one knew anything about it. There was no record of it ever being built or who built it. It's just there. It had always been. Everyone else just seemed to ignore it and try to imagine it wasn't there, probably because they wanted to imagine it wasn't there. But Axel, Caleb, and their group of friends just couldn't seem to get it off their minds. They had to know. They didn't really know exactly what they wanted to know, but they just had to know, whatever it was. They both stood staring at the barn house, both stuck in a trance with it, as if they were hypnotised. As Axel listened closer, he could almost hear the barn house, as if it was talking. The wind was hitting against it, making a sound like it was saying something. He tried to listen to what it was saying, but he couldn't make out. He listened closer, and then heard it. "Help me, Axel, help me." What on earth, he thought, shocked, almost fallen out of a trance, falling onto his own 2 feet. He tried to listen even closer. To his surprise, he heard it again. "Help me, Axel, help me." Suddenly, Lightning struck the roof of the barn house, which knocked them both flying onto the floor and out of their trances. It started raining heavily. Caleb picked himself up, walked over to where Axel was, and helped him back onto his feet. "You good?" Caleb asked. "I think so." "Good. We'd better get home. It's pouring down and I'm already soaked." "Yeah, sure," Axel replied, not really listening. In fact, not even taking his eye off the barn. He was just absolutely stunned by it. How did it talk? How did it talk? He kept repeating this over and over to himself in his mind, but eventually Caleb snapped him out of it and they walked home together, quickly. The walk turned into a very quick walk, and then a jog, and all of a sudden, a straight-out sprint. Caleb heard it talk as well. Axel knew that. How did it talk? That's what he wanted to know. That's what he needed to know. They both ran straight home without saying a single word to each other, because they didn't need to. They knew what they had heard, and that's all they needed to know, to send them bolting away from it and bolting home, where it was safe, or at least they thought it was safe. Axel Clegg lay fully awake in his bed that night, tossing and turning constantly, with no sleep at all for the whole night. How did it talk, he thought. It couldn't have talked. It's a barn house, for Christ's sake. But it did talk. He knew what he heard, and it was very clear as the light blue sky on a cloudless sunny day. It did talk. It must have talked. Axel Clegg may not have been the most intelligent person in the world, but he's not deaf, and that barn house did talk. He was sure of it. Chapter 2. The bell rang, causing kids to come pouring out from every direction, all of them trying to reach the same place, the school's main exit. It was Friday afternoon, and summer break was just about to begin. Every part of the building soon became flooded. Some of the older kids came pushing through the crowd, as if there was no one there. In one of the classes, a teacher was yelling at her students, "The bell doesn't dismiss you, I do." But before she could finish her sentence, the whole class had already disappeared off into a sea of students. Two of the kids, just about surviving the crowd, were named Rowan Stenhouse and Andrew Keyes. They were a long way from the front of the crowd, as their Period 6 class was at the complete opposite end of the school. Plus their stupid geography teacher kept them class behind for a few minutes for no reason. They had the idea to wait a few minutes for the crowd to die out a bit, but realised if they did that, they would be there all night. The fast-flowing river of students seemed to never end. Rowan found out the hard way last year before the summer break began. He was having his Period 6 lesson, and it was nearly the end of the day. They all had about 5 to 10 minutes left of the classroom, until Rowan, one of his other mates named Paul Webb, who at the time sat next to him, began tossing paper aeroplanes across the classroom at people as a joke. Rowan didn't find the joke funny for much longer, as he and Paul had to stay behind for a few minutes. When they were finally let out, they were met by extremely dangerous, fast-flowing motion of students. They decided to wait for the current to slow down a little bit, but ended up waiting for ages. At one point, they thought it might never end. However, at long last, the crowd was down to just a few kids walking calmly down the hallway, looking forward to the summer break. Unfortunately for Rowan, when he finally got to the bus stop that he usually waited at, the buses were just leaving as he had a few seconds too late. And that was a very bad start to a very bad summer break that year, which he didn't want to repeat over. Eventually, the crowd started to flow out of the building as the students started pouring out everywhere and could finally start to make their way home without being pushed about constantly. Rowan and Andrew could finally see the light at the end of the hallway. However, all of a sudden, a massive fat kid with fully grown facial hair was approaching them from behind, storming through the crowd and knocking down anyone that got in his way. Rowan tried to think quickly and then saw that there were lockers on each side of the hallway, so without hesitation he grabbed Andrew and ran towards the gap in between the row of them and hid there until the fat beast stormed past. They stayed there for a few seconds until the crowd died down a little and it was safe to go. At long last, after Rowan and Andrew had eventually exited the school safely, without too many injuries from being pushed around, they stepped through the doors of the yellow and blue double-decker school bus, walked up the stairs and sat near the other two friends, Axel Clegg and Caleb Hatch. "What took you two so long?" asked Axel. "Our goddamn bloody geography teacher wouldn't let us go until about 5 minutes after the bell had gone," Rowan replied in an annoyed, irritated tone. "Me and Caleb ran as fast as we could as soon as the bell went and—" "Did the older kids not catch you up?" "Nah, we went out the side exit. We're the only ones in the school who know about that exit." "Oh yeah, I forgot about the side exit," Rowan replied, feeling stupid as he slapped his hand up to his face, feeling slightly embarrassed. "You mean you went out the main exit, Caleb replied, surprised, his eyes growing. "No wonder you took so long." There was silence for a while as the bus began to leave. Axel said, "We need to go and visit that barn house. All of us this time." Before any of them could respond, they heard a voice coming from a few rows back from where they were sitting. It was a quiet kid that not many people knew much about. He had no friends and would constantly have his hood up as if he were hiding something in it. His name was Jared Hall. He said, "Don't go there. The devil owns it. And it's his territory, so stay out." They all sat silent for a moment, sort of terrified by what they had just heard, until Andrew broke the silence and started laughing hysterically. Caleb and Rowan soon followed, but Axel just stared at Jared, still terrified, not being able to move a muscle as Jared stared back at him, both of them not finding any of it funny at all. "Hey, maybe we shouldn't go near the barn house," Axel tried to tell them, but the rest of them just sat there and laughed at him. "Oh, the devil is going to come for us," Rowan replied in a mocking voice. "Don't go to the haunted barn house," Andrew said mockingly. "The devil will come." They all laughed. Caleb didn't say anything, but he laughed with them. Rowan got up and walked over to where Jared was sitting. He looked down at him as if he was a tiny and said, "We're going to go to the barn house this weekend and we're going to find nothing but the things you would expect to find in a stupid, old, abandoned barn house. Aren't we?" He looked over to his friends, but only Andrew was nodding his head. "Caleb?" Yeah, sure," he replied, not sounding confident at all. "Axel?" But Axel replied by sticking his middle finger up at him and saying, "Have fun meeting the devil, you three." Rowan walked back down to where Axel, Caleb and Andrew were sitting. He looked at Axel angrily. "Get up," Rowan said, but Axel just sat there. "Get up!" He was shouting now. Everyone else on the bus sat silent and watching. This time he stood up. Suddenly, out of nowhere, Rowan clenched both hands into fists and threw his right one straight into the centre of Axel's nose, and he fell back. Suddenly, Jared swung up from his seat and charged at Rowan. He ran into Rowan and pushed him with an incredible amount of force, and he went flying down to the front of the bus, which wasn't that far since they were already quite close to the front. Rowan didn't get up very fast. He was too shocked by how much force Jared had pushed him with, and was too scared to fight back. Jared went back to his seat, sat down as if nothing had happened, and went back to what he was doing, staring out the window and trying very hard not to think about the barn house. Everyone else sat on the bus, silently shocked. Chapter 3. Axel Clegg's summer was all about to be wrecked once he finally answered his phone. He was home alone and was finally enjoying his first day off school. He was sitting down beneath the sun, his back garden, when he decided to stroll into the kitchen and pour himself a nice cold glass of water, and maybe even toss in some ice. He was hot and dehydrated and needed a drink. However, before he even took one step inside the house, he could see his phone on the side ringing and vibrating like crazy. His initial thought was, crap, it's probably my parents. They've probably been calling me for hours. But he was wrong. When he finally got closer enough to his phone to see who had been ringing him all this time, he quickly realised that it was not his parents. Far from it. It was Rowan Stenhouse. Axel answered and immediately started shouting, "What the hell do you want, you piece of—" But before Axel could finish, Rowan shouted into the phone, "Oh God, Axel, you gotta come quick!" Rowan screamed, "The devil's coming for us! We're in the woods, come quick!" Rowan shouted as if this would be his last, and then hung up the phone. "I'm gonna go and kick his goddamn arse in," Axel shouted to himself angrily and bashed his phone back down. He left the house instantly, slammed the door forcibly shut behind him, almost breaking the hinges off and shattering the glass windows, and stormed off, up the road and towards the entrance of the forest, with nothing but fury in his eyes. There was a small gate separating the tiny village that the locals named Sideville and the deep forest that lay on the other side. Axel Clegg kicked the gate open and stepped over to the forest side of the gate, running. He ran along the dirt trail with one thing on his mind, and the only thing: to beat the crap out of Rowan Stenhouse. He ran through the forest, searching everywhere, pretty much ripping up every individual tree root out the ground, trying to find him. Suddenly, in the far distance, he heard laughter. Kids' laughter. Rowan Stenhouse's laughter. He followed the laughter, and it led deep into the side of a big sheer cliff, and deeper still into a massive cave. He walked a few inches in and shouted, "Where the hell are you?" He heard laughing again, coming from inside the cave, but it didn't sound exactly like Rowan anymore. The voice of the laughter was slightly deeper. Suddenly he was scared. He slowly tiptoed further into the cave and tried very carefully to listen again. Silence. He kept going further and further until it was practically pitch black. So he had to take out his flashlight from his phone and shine it around the cave. He walked further, taking good care not to make much noise. He suddenly started to worry that maybe his phone battery might be low. This would mean that his flashlight would go out. He quickly looked at his phone battery. 67%. Panic over. There was plenty. He turned the corner and slowly but steadily carried on. "This is stupid," he muttered to himself. "Rowan ain't going to be this deep into the cave, just for a silly old little prank. Especially not with his idiotic buddy Caleb. He was scared of everything." Suddenly, as he said this, a loud notification came through on his phone, and for a moment Axel could swear that his heart had stopped. He looked at the message. Popped up. Battery low. "The flashlight will now turn off. Crap," he shouted out loud. "Crap, crap, crap," he repeated. "It was on 67% a minute ago. What's going on?" He whacked his phone and threw it aggressively onto the hard, cold concrete floor in anger. Suddenly he looked up. He saw it. He saw the devil. He couldn't see much in that cave, but the red glowing eyes of the devil lit everything up. He could see perfectly well, but he would much rather see the dark. And Axel was terrified of the dark, but he would rather see anything other than those evil, demonic-looking eyes of the devil itself. Axel turned and ran. He ran and ran and ran until either his legs would collapse and stop working or he reached home. But until then, he kept running. Eventually, he could see the light leading out of the cave. He kept running and finally got out into the sunlight and away from the everlasting darkness of the cave. He turned around and saw that the red glowing light of the devil's eyes was gone. He relaxed slightly. He moved further through the forest trying to find the exit, but only got more lost. He almost thought that he might be lost, but eventually found some more of the woods that he recognised a little bit. He walked, then stopped, but the sound of his footsteps carried on going. Then he realised they weren't his footsteps. It was the footsteps of someone else behind him. He jumped, turned around instantly and screamed. He was met by someone shouting and jumping on him. It was this very recognisable face of Rowan Stenhouse. Rowan and his friends were laughing their heads off hysterically. "Oh, sorry! Did I scare you?" Rowan asked mockingly as they all laughed. "I promise we're not the devil," Andrew said from behind. They all laughed harder. Out of nowhere, Axel picked up his fist and threw it straight into Rowan's chin. It knocked him down, but unfortunately didn't knock him out. Rowan got up, looked at Axel in disgust, as if he was in the wrong, pushed him away, and followed after Andrew and Caleb, who had already run miles off. Axel turned, looked towards the cave, and saw eternal darkness that lay within it, and that caused Axel to run off too. After a few hours of searching around the village, it was starting to get dark, and Axel knew his parents would be home soon. But just as Axel was making his way home, he found just the man he was looking for, and his name was, of course, Jared Hall. He found him sitting on a bench reading a non-fiction horror book about the work of demons and ghosts. When he found him, Axel approached him and began the conversation. "Jared Hall," he said, as Jared put his book down and faced him, "I need you to tell me everything you know about that barn house and what the devil has to do with it." He replied, "What, so you can make sure it's all safe when you go up and mess around up there with your friends later? Well, get this in your head, it's not." "But I'm not going up there later." "Don't lie to me. I know what you and your stupid, pathetic little group of friends are planning. They're not my friends, and I'm disgusted forever letting them be my friends in the past. You're just asking me this, so when I answer, your friends will come out from behind that bush over there, and you'll all start laughing at me." "I'm asking because I saw the devil in the cave out in the forest earlier." They both paused for a moment, which for Axel felt like eternity, and stared at each other blankly. Jared tried to talk. You mean you went in the cave and saw the devil?" "Yes," Axel finished his sentence for him. Jared got up. "Come with me," he said, very solemnly, and wandered around the bench and started to walk off. Where are we going?" Axel demanded. "To tell you everything I know." They arrived at Jared's house, which was surprisingly quite close to the barn house. They walked past the barn house on their journey to Jared's house, and stopped for a few moments. To Axel it seemed like many, and looked straight at it. "That," Jared had said, "is the devil's home. Right here in this small village where nothing ever happens." Axel tried to ask him what he meant, but Jared refused to say anything until they got to his house, walked in through the door, went up the stairs, entered his bedroom and sat down. Jared sat comfortably in his chair and let Axel sit on his bed. "Now, listen very closely to everything I have to say, as it's all very important," Jared began. "I'm about to tell you something that no one else knows," and he began to explain everything. Outside, a storm had begun. Chapter 4. Rowan ran because he was scared. He was scared of Axel. He never admitted it, but he was scared of him. And Jared especially. So, he had run off after Axel had punched him in the chin, almost knocking him out, earlier that day, and his friends had scuttered off with him, also scared. They were now together in Rowan's bedroom, trying to plan the perfect day or night. To go to that barn house, to prove there was nothing there, or maybe to see if anything was there. "How about tomorrow night?" Rowan suggested. My parents will be out all night, so I'll be able to do what I want. Caleb quickly replied, How about we go in the daytime? I won't be able to come out at night at all this summer. However, Caleb meant to say, I'm way too scared to go out at night time. But if he had said that, they probably wouldn't let him go with them, or possibly even kick him out of their friend group for being so scared. I can go out any time this week apart from Tuesday. On Tuesday I'm only available in the evening, Andrew explained. And I can't go out Monday, stated Caleb. How about Wednesday afternoon then, Rowan asked. They all agreed. Good, Rowan replied, pleased. Very good. Wednesday it is. And they all went back to playing their video games. The barn house already off their minds, not knowing that the barn house was going to change their lives forever. Chapter 5. Axel Clegg lay in his bed that night and recalled everything. The barn house, the cave, what the devil had to do with it all. Everything. Jared had suspiciously glanced out of his window to make sure no one was watching or listening to him. Shut his blind, sat down on the bed and faced Axel. That barn house is where the devil sleeps, and that cave is where he goes when he wakes up. The devil only wakes up every 50 years. And you said you saw it in that cave. Is that right? Yes. Then that means that this village is in great danger, Jared replied. It's in great danger of the devil. Why is it in this village, though? Axel began to ask. It could choose to live anywhere. It could choose... Why would it choose this small village? Why? That's the thing, Axel. It didn't choose to live here. Then why is it here? I'll tell you, but you've got to promise not to repeat a single word of this to anyone. Do you understand? Axel had never felt so scared in his life, but he needed to know, otherwise he could be in great danger, so he replied, I understand. Great, now listen up, Jared began. Years ago, sometime around the 1700s, this village was very different. A bunch of evil devil worshippers built this town years ago. They built it here because it was near the woods, and the woods had a cave, and the cave was a direct doorway to hell. Also, they named it Sideville because it has the word devil in it. Sideville. They did evil, satanic rituals there, but eventually the devil came for them and killed all of them, but one. This one was the one that built the exact barn house just a few 100 metres from where we're sitting right now. This one was called Chester Woodward. Chester didn't build that barn house, he lived there. However, one night the devil found him and did something to him disturbing. I can't even think about it. Jared paused for a moment, but eventually carried on. Anyway, the devil took the barn house from him and rested there for a very long time. About 50 years later, around 1819, they destroyed the remains of the old abandoned village and started to build a new one. They took down everything but the barn house and the name of the village, not knowing that it spelled out the word devil. Why didn't they knock down the barn house? Because it's the only thing that still stood in that village, so they thought. What's the point? It's a waste of materials. Everything. However, every 50 years, the devil wakes up from that barn house, goes to his cave and causes loads of people to go missing. And that's what I'm worried about now. The devil's woken up again, and I'm mostly worried for you because you went into the bloody cave. They both sat staring at each other blankly, not knowing what to say next, both with shocked expressions on their faces. Suddenly, Axel's phone rang. Crap, he shouted out loud. It's my parents. They're probably home by now. And Jared had just sat there and watched him leave. After he left, he answered his phone and crossed his fingers very tightly. So tightly, in fact, that his fingers started sweating. Luckily for Axel, it was just his mum letting him know that she and his dad would be home a bit later, and they, thank God, weren't home searching the entire village for him. He lay in his bed as he finished recalling everything that Jared had told him that evening, and somehow he slept. Outside, the devil was waiting. Chapter 6. Ian Frost was born on Monday the 22nd of January 1979. He lived an ordinary life, graduated from high school in 1997 when he was 18 years old. Got married on the 17th of July 2004 when he was 25 years old to a girl named Jacqueline, who he had been in love with since high school. They eventually had a kid in 2011 when Ian was 32 years old and Jacqueline was 33 years old, that they named Victor. But then Ian made the worst decision of his life when he moved to a small village named Sideville in 2015. The night it happened was very early in the morning on Monday the 12th of June 2022 at around 3 o'clock. Just before he fell off the sheer cliff and plunged to his death, Ian Frost woke up from his first nightmare in around 10 to 15 years. However, this nightmare soon turned into a real-life nightmare when he was fully awoken by the terrifying, disturbing screams that came from his 10-year-old son's bedroom. Without even looking up to see if his wife had woken up, he charged straight across the hallway and into his son's room. "Vic!" he shouted, but Vic wasn't there. Instead, there was an empty bedsheet covered entirely with blood and nothing else. There was not a spot of white to be seen. The whole world fell silent for a long while as he broke down in tears hysterically. His wife was right behind him, crying even louder, but he took no notice until about 30 minutes later. Until then, he couldn't stand up. And this was just one of many disappearances that happened that night. Others include Spencer Powers, aged 11, Sydney Bolton, aged 9, Jeffrey Poulton, aged 15, Lizzie Marsden, aged 7, Paul Webb, aged 15, Catherine Brandon, aged 11, and Dwayne Bristow, aged 7. Only the devil knew who would be next. Chapter 7. Jared Hall was scared. He had woken up that Monday morning at 8 a.m. and recalled everything that happened to him earlier that night. It had started with a remarkably vivid nightmare about the cave. He had woken up to the sight of cold, damp rock above him and the feel of wet rock below him. This can't be real, he thought, but it was too way vivid for that to be fake. He sat up and shivered, but not because of the cold, and not because he was scared, but because he was terrified. He stood up and faced a dead end, a cold, stony dead end. He turned around and saw a tunnel, which seemed to lead to eternal darkness. He eventually started to walk very slowly and carefully down the long tunnel, but it soon became way too dark to see a thing. A shiver ran down his spine. After what felt like hours, he turned a corner, hoping to see the tiniest bit of light, but instead there was another ridiculously long, dark tunnel. As fear slowly turned to anger, he began running down the tunnel, but the anger soon turned back to fear, and that caused him to sprint. He ran out of breath a few minutes later and came to a sudden stop, smacked both his hands on his knees and breathed heavily. After a few minutes of catching his breath, he reluctantly decided to carry on walking. After a few steps, he remembered that he had his phone on him and that he could use the flashlight from his phone to light up the dark tunnel. He quickly felt around in his pocket and felt something in there, and it felt like a phone. He felt relieved, slotted his hand into his pocket and pulled out his phone. He turned it on and saw that it had 92% battery. "I'm finally getting a bit of luck," he thought, and he typed in his password, swiped down, and enabled his flashlight. He pointed the bright light out in front of him, and the entire tunnel lit up. He turned around and shone it, but this time, as well as a very lit up tunnel, he could also see two red dots at the end that looked like eyes. They looked like the devil's eyes, and they were coming towards him at a very high speed. "Crap!" he shouted out loud to himself and started to sprint away very quickly. He reached a dead end. He turned around and saw the devil now very close. He screamed. The devil kept coming closer. He was cornered at the end of a long dark tunnel alone, and the devil was coming for him. "Please be a dream," he muttered to himself as he sat down with his face down on his knees crying. "Please be a dream, please be a dream, please be a..." Suddenly he woke up in his bed and sighed, very relieved. But that was before he noticed that he wasn't in his bedroom. Instead, he was in the barn house. Here there was nothing but rotting wood for walls, and a roof, and hay covering the entire floor, and in the middle of it was his bed. He tried to get up, but couldn't, as there was some invisible force holding him down. The only thing he could move was his head. He looked around, expecting to see the devil, but surprisingly he didn't. All he saw was a blank, empty room with nothing but old hay and an old digital clock. The time read 3:01 a.m. A few minutes later he remembered his phone in his pocket. He checked it, and his phone was still there. But his flashlight was still on from the previous dream. That's if it was a dream. And had drained the battery so much it was now only 17%. At 3:12 a.m. the flashlight turned off. He lay terrified for about 20 minutes, but at 3:33 a.m. it finally happened. He had the vision. The vision began with Victor Frost. He was in the body of Victor and had woken up at 3:33 a.m. He looked around the room and saw that his closet door was wide open. So without thinking much of it, he got up, looked in and closed it. There was nothing in there, so he went back to bed and back to sleep. A few minutes later he woke up again, but this time he saw someone, or something, standing at the end of his bed, staring at him. "Dad?" Victor asked. But it wasn't his dad. It couldn't have been. It was at least 6'5", had some red glowing demonic eyes. It stood there for some time until it slowly crawled across his bed towards him. Vic started to cry and began to scream as it crawled over his covers closer. And then everything went black. He saw nothing, but he knew everything. Every morning at 3:33 a.m, from now on, the devil will own the village for 27 minutes and will kill whoever it likes and will not stop until it is satisfied. And then it will return 50 or so years later when it's once again hungry to kill. And then he woke up, for real this time, in his bed, in his bedroom. It's all fine. The sun shone through his thick blinds. He checked the time. It was 8 a.m. But Jared was still just as scared because he didn't know when the devil was coming for him. And then he remembered Axel. When would it take Axel, he thought, or maybe it already had. So, without hesitation, he grabbed his phone to call him. But it was out of battery, just like it was in his dream. Weird. Quickly, without even bothering to put his phone on charge, he jumped out of bed, whacked on some clothes, faster than the speed of light, and he left his room. But before he could go any further, he was met by the sight of his worried father running towards him and hugging him very tightly. "Oh, thank God you're okay, son." "What's wrong?" Jared asked, puzzled.
"Earlier this morning, at around 3 a.m, 8 kids were murdered in their sleep, and no one could find their bodies."
Jared's father said more, but Jared didn't hear. The vision was true, he thought. Jared was terrified. 8 kids! There's a high chance one of them could be Axel. "I've got to see Axel Clegg," Jared interrupted him as he ran downstairs.
"Wait, where are you going?"
his father tried to ask, but it was too late because Jared was already gone. When he arrived at Axel's house, Axel was still asleep, which made Jared worry because he wasn't answering the door, but eventually, after the 3rd or 4th ring, he saw a familiar face looking through the window of the door, walking towards him. It was Axel Clegg, and this made Jared relax, slightly. Axel was about to start with welcoming him, "Hi," but got quickly interrupted by Jared. "Are your parents at home?" "No, they left at 7. Why?" Axel replied, very confused. "We need to talk. Can I come in?" "Yeah, sure." Jared was silent until they both were in Axel's bedroom sitting down, and then he began. "Last night, 8 kids in this village went missing, and I'm positive that's to do with the devil." "What?" "I had a vision of the whole thing," Jared continued. "I was in the body of someone named Victor Frost, and I saw the devil get me. It was so vivid that it was almost real, and when I woke up this morning, I found out that it was real." "Oh my God," Jared replied. "Well, it's gonna come for us." "That's what I'm worried about, Axel. Only the devil knows that." There was silence for a moment until Axel said, "What are we going to do, Jared?" "I don't know, Axel. I don't know." There was a much longer silence this time, and they both stared at each other, not knowing what to say, until eventually Jared spoke. "The only thing we can do is stay up all night and watch out for the devil, I guess." They didn't speak for much longer before Jared left to go home. Jared didn't do much for the rest of the day, and all Axel did was see if Rowan Stenhouse and Andrew Keyes and Caleb Hatch were still alive, which they were. Not that he cared, he was just curious. And then night came, and all they could do was hope. Chapter 8. While Jared Hall was telling Axel Clegg about the disappearances that had happened early that morning, Caleb Hatch had just found out about them. "Jesus Christ," he thought. "One of them could have been me." And that thought developed onto another. One of them could have been me. Tonight. He had found out about all of this on the morning of Monday the 12th of June at around 8:30 a.m. He was eating breakfast and looking at the news on his phone when he found a story that left him speechless. 8 kids go missing in the same night in the small village of Sideville. "Jesus!" he shouted out loud without realising. "That's where I live." And then his parents came in and asked what was wrong. "Nothing," he said. It's fine." It was now midday, and as each minute passed, he was getting more and more worried. The village wasn't doing anything about it because they didn't know what they could do. His parents had even found out and weren't doing anything. Everyone was just hoping that it wouldn't happen again. But it would, and Caleb knew that. And then a thought came that he wished hadn't. Maybe Jared was right. Maybe Axel was right. Maybe the devil is real. And maybe it's in this village. Throughout the day, Caleb Hatch had 3 phone calls. All of them got worse as the day went on. The first phone call rang at 12:30 p.m. It was Axel Clegg. "Did you hear what happened last night?" Axel began. "Yeah, I mean, who didn't?" "I'm glad you're alive, Caleb," Axel said, half lying. "I don't know who or what did it, but I think it might be to do with that barn house. So please don't go there." "Don't be stupid, Axel. A barn house can't kill 8 kids in one night." "Come on, mate. We both heard that barn house talk." "Don't be stupid. The barn house can't talk." "And the next thing you're probably going to say is that the devil lives up there or something." And with that, Caleb hung up. He didn't know what to think anymore. The only reason why he didn't believe what Axel said was that he didn't want to believe what Axel said. And that scared him. Was he really going to go to that barn house? This is the thought that stayed on his mind the most. But after the second phone call, he had made up his mind. The second phone call happened around 2 o'clock, and it was from Rowan Stenhouse. It was bad news. Rowan began. "Sorry, Caleb, but we've decided to go to the barn house tomorrow night instead of Wednesday afternoon. I hope you can still come." I'm not sure, Rowan. I'll let you know tomorrow night." "All right, but I hope you can make it." And just before Rowan Stenhouse was about to hang up, Caleb said something that he soon regretted saying. "Hey, maybe we just shouldn't go to the barn house at all? Something seems off about it, Rowan." "What? Do you think the goddamn devil lives there or something?" Rowan sounded slightly angry now. "Well, I don't think the devil lives there, but what? Let me guess.
It's haunted by ghosts. Ooh. There are ghosts there. Ooh."
He paused for a second or two before carrying on. "Look, Caleb, we're going to that barn house tomorrow night. Do you want to come? Or are you going to be chicken out, like you do pretty much everything?" "Rowan, I don't care what you say, but I'm not going to that barn house, and I'm warning you and Andrew not to go there. Whether you do or not, it's up to you. You're the ones who'll be in danger." "Danger? Shut up, Caleb." And with that, they both pressed the hang-up button at the same time, annoyed with each other. Caleb spent the next few hours lying on his bed crying. Before long, it was already the evening, and it was getting dark, and then the third phone call had come. And this one was the worst. It was from an unknown number. But it was no ordinary random number. He picked his phone up, and the number read 666. He pressed decline, feeling scared and confused, but it malfunctioned and answered anyway. He thought, "Here goes nothing," and pulled the phone slowly to his ear, terrified. There was silence for a moment until someone or something talked. 7 hours, it said in a creepy low voice, and hung up. Caleb instantly dropped his phone on the floor in shock, stepped away from it, and folded himself into the ball in the corner of his room, his face in his knees, and sat there for a very long time, not being able to move, with the most scared, shocked face ever. Eventually, he calmed down a little bit and was able to think straight. He looked at the time. It was about 8:30, and in 7 hours it would be 3 a.m. And then he remembered that the disappearances last night happened at 3 a.m. And then he was scared, except scared isn't a strong enough word. He was disturbed and horrified. Tonight the devil was going to come for him, and tonight the devil would kill him. Outside, a storm had begun. Part 2. The Unknown Man. Chapter 9. There was one night in Sideville that changed everyone's life forever, and that was the night when the devil was the hungriest and the most powerful it had ever been. And that night was a night that no one would ever forget, and that night was so horrifying that everyone who witnessed it had their lives changed forever. And that night was a night like no other, because the night was Tuesday, the 13th of June, 2022, and that night was the night of the devil. As Axel Clegg and Jared Hall were getting ready for a long, sleepless night, and Caleb Hatch was still recovering from the horrifying phone call, the orange, fiery sun began to settle beyond the horizon for the second night of horror. The day was Monday the 12th of June. The time was 10 o'clock, and Axel and Jared were both in bed, wide awake. They had planned for Axel to sneak over to Jared's house just before 3 a.m, and there they would wait for the devil. Eventually the clock struck 2:30 a.m, and Axel was getting his clothes on, ready to sneak out and meet Jared at his house. Jared's father had a ladder beside his shed, so Jared had gone into his garden once his parents were asleep, and had grabbed the ladder and had placed it leading up to his bedroom window. The plan was for Axel to jump over the garden fence, which was right next to the main road, since his house was on the corner. Get into Jared's garden, climb up the ladder, tap on Jared's bedroom window, and let him know that he'd already arrived and Jared had let him in. And if they survived the devil's hour, then Axel would do the opposite of how he got there and go home, hopefully without Jared's or Axel's parents ever knowing. "This is crazy," Axel quietly muttered to himself. He was currently trying to put his coat on and was making way too much noise in the process. "Why has everything got to be so much louder at night?" he thought to himself. Eventually got his coat on, luckily without waking anyone up, and was now approaching the back door, and the front door would make far too much noise. And luckily, as well as Jared, Axel's house was also on a corner, so he could jump the fence and get out with no problem at all, or so he thought, with no problem at all. He grabbed the back door key out of the key pot, slotted it into the lock, started to turn the key and pushed the door forward, then stepped out and walked into his garden, closing the door gently behind him. He now stood before a 7-foot-high fence that separated his house from the rest of the village. The only way he could get over was by climbing onto his shed, which was conveniently placed right next to the fence, and climbing over that way. The only problem with that was that he had tried to do this before when he was a lot younger, and that only resulted in breaking his ankle. However, if he broke his ankle now, that wouldn't even be half the problem. The main problem is, what the hell would he tell his parents? I was going to Jared's house so I could survive the devil, but then I slipped off the roof of the shed, trying to get out. Eventually, after thinking long and hard about it, he finally decided to climb the shed. He went to the lowered part of the roof and grabbed hold of it. He tried to pull himself up, but had nowhere near enough strength to do so. I'm never going to get onto this shed. What's the point? He told himself, annoyed and disappointed. He tried a few more times, but got nowhere on any of them. And that's when he decided to give up. However, when he was walking back to the house, he saw something that gave him an idea. Axel, you're a goddamn genius, he muttered to himself. Right in front of him, he spotted a ladder on the floor, tucked neatly away next to the fence. Ladders are the way to get anywhere, I guess. And he said this. He walked over to the ladder, rested it against the fence, and climbed over as quietly as possible. Caleb Hatch was terrified. It was currently 2:50 a.m, and it wouldn't be long until the devil would come and decide his fate. He lay motionless in a large puddle of sweat, recalling the memory of the phone call that he had had from the devil earlier. He didn't know what to do. He knew he had something to do, but what? Suddenly an idea struck him. It wasn't a great idea, but there was no such thing as a great idea being Caleb's position right now. Any idea would be good for him. He would call Rowan Stenhouse and ask him and Andrew if they wanted to go to the barn house now at 3 a.m. He knew it was stupid, but what else could he do? If Caleb stayed in his bedroom all night, then the devil would eventually come, and it would kill him. He had no other choice. Eventually, after finally convincing himself to move, he sat up on his pool of sweat and grabbed his phone, which was placed on the bedside table to the left of him, and turned it on. The time read 2:54 a.m. Crap, he thought. I've got to be quick. The devil could get here soon. He went to his contacts, quickly scrolled down for Rowan Stenhouse and phoned him. Caleb began. Hey Rowan, I was wondering if you wanted to go to the barn house now, at 3 a.m, just to prove that stupid Jared kid wrong. He managed to keep his voice surprisingly calm. What? You've decided the devil doesn't live there? Rowan, I never said that. Joking. You know what? That's a good idea. Let's go now. And Rowan said this. Caleb's heart suddenly started to beat twice as fast, and he started to add to his large flooding pool of sweat. I'll call Andrew and see what he thinks, but start to make your way down there now, because I'll come whether Andrew wants to or not. Okay. He paused and took a deep breath. I'll meet you there. As Caleb said this, he hung up. That seemed way too easy, he thought to himself. But what didn't cross his mind was if the devil had made it easy on purpose. Axel Clegg sprinted around the corner that his house sat on and ran towards Jared's house. The time was 2:57 a.m. After about a minute, he was already halfway between his house and the barn house, which was very close to Jared's house. The thought of the barn house then developed onto another thought. Let's go there. No, he told himself very strictly. I've got to stay focused and get to Jared's house. And with that, he carried on. Another minute and a half passed until he drew his left wrist up towards his face and glanced at the time. 3 a.m. is what it said. The devil had probably been released by now and was strolling around the streets. Suddenly he realised that he was going the wrong way. He subconsciously going to the slightly longer route that went past the barn house. He tried to turn around and go the other way, but he couldn't. The urge was too strong. and before long he could see the approaching barn house in the distance. He fought his very hardest against the urge, but still he couldn't fight it off, and before he knew it he had stopped and was now staring straight up at the old rotting barn house. Lightning flashed behind it. The time read 3:02 a.m. While Axel Clegg was trying to convince himself to stay focused, Caleb Hatch had just left the house when his phone rang. It was Rowan Stenhouse. "Hey Rowan, what's up?" Caleb began. "Did you ask Andrew if he's coming?" "Yeah, I did, and he is coming, so I'll meet you there," replied Rowan. "We'll probably be there at about 3:03 a.m. "All right, Rowan, cheers, bye." And then he hung up. He was surprised how calm he was talking. He didn't feel that calm. He felt terrified. He slotted his phone back in his trouser pocket and began to walk towards the barn house. When Caleb was less than 800 metres away from the barn house, he saw Rowan and Andrew not too far in front of him, so he ran and caught them up. "Hey Andrew, glad you could come with us," Caleb started.
"Hey Caleb, I'm glad you finally stopped being so scared, so we could finally prove that stupid Jared kid wrong," Andrew replied.
Eventually they could see the barn house not too far in the distance. "There it is," Rowan stated solemnly. "The barn house." "Rowan?" Andrew asked. "Yes, Andrew?" "Who is that?" Andrew pointed towards a mysterious figure in the distance standing right up to the barn house, staring at it. Suddenly lightning struck the roof of the barn house, and suddenly they were all slightly scared. The time was 3:02 a.m. Everything happened so quickly. One moment Axel Clegg was staring at the barn house, the next moment he heard very quick footsteps behind him, and the next moment everything went black. The next thing he remembered seeing was a cold, wet concrete floor. Eventually he sat up, looked around, and saw Rowan Stenhouse, Andrew Keyes and Caleb Hatch standing above him looking down. "Not so tough any more, are you?" Rowan Stenhouse shouted down at him. "Don't go into that barn house," Axel struggled to say. "It's haunted by the devil by any chance? Oh well, I guess the devil's going to get us then, isn't he?" Axel tried to open his mouth to speak, but got interrupted by Rowan kicking him hard in the stomach. "Screw you," Rowan shouted as he stuck his middle finger up at him. "Come on, let's finally get this silly little barn house then, shall we?" And with that the three of them entered. First Rowan, then Andrew, and finally Caleb, leaving Axel on the floor by himself for the next at least 20 minutes. The time read 3:05 a.m. While Axel Clegg was lying on the floor half conscious, Jared Hall was getting his clothes on so he could go out and look for him. Not only was he about 20 minutes late, but he had also tried to call him at least 10 times now, and he hadn't answered any of the calls. The only way to get out was to go the way set up for Axel to get in, down the ladder and over the fence, so that's what he did. He reached out for the handle on the window, grabbed it, pulled it up and pushed forward. He opened the window as wide as it would possibly go, and then began to climb out. He got up onto the inside of the windowsill and climbed through it. He reached his foot through the window and tried to reach the top step of the ladder. Once his foot found the top step of the ladder, he put his other leg through the window and placed it down on the same step next to his other foot. He carefully lowered himself down onto the ladder and began the descent. Once he reached the floor, the next step to climb was over the fence. This shouldn't be too hard, Jared thought, and he was right. He grabbed the top of the old wooden fence, which was about 5 feet tall, and used his upper body strength to lift himself over with no problems at all. Jared was tough, and nothing was going to stop him from doing what he had to do. Not even the devil. He ran around the corner and could already see the barn house from where he was. He started to run towards it, and before long he was there, staring at Axel's body lying on the floor. "Oh no," he said out loud. He shouted, "Axel, Axel!" As he ran over to him, he was unconscious, so Jared shook him hard, slapping him multiple times in the face as he did so. "Axel, wake up!" Eventually he woke up. "Axel, what happened?" Jared asked. "Rowan, he's there." He pointed at the barn house. "We need to go in there and get him, before the devil does." "What we need to do, Axel, is talk about this in my bedroom at home," Jared replied stubbornly. "But Rowan is..." "I don't care about Rowan, he's an idiot." And he's not my top priority right now. Right now, we need to get somewhere safe. Jared was shouting at him now and helped him up. Okay, yeah, you're right, let's go. Axel stood up, stumbled a bit, found his balance and started to make his way towards Jared's house following him. Eventually, after they got to Jared's house, jumped the fence, climbed the ladder and got into Jared's bedroom window. They sat down and Axel explained everything that had happened that night. Little did they know that that night had only just begun. Suddenly the clock struck 3:30 a.m. Chapter 10. The mysterious man walking down US 30 had one thing on his mind: to get to the small village of Sideville. He had been walking for almost 5 hours now, and he still had a long way to go. However, his feet didn't ache, he wasn't tired, and he still felt as if he'd only been walking for a couple of minutes. The day was Monday the 12th of June, and the time was 10:30 p.m. He had started his journey when the sun was still up at around 5:30 in the small town named Chapel in western Nebraska. After 5 hours of walking, only 6 cars had passed him. It was a quiet highway in the middle of nowhere. He looked to his left and saw nothing but the sight of grass and a few dead trees spotted around. He looked to his right, but again saw nothing but grass, and this time a distant village that looked about 1,000 miles away. He sniffed the fresh air of the night sky, and it was good. All he needed to do now was to get to Sideville, and then it would be great. He was an old wise man with grey stubbly beard and grey balding hair. He wore worn-out hiking boots and a long black overcoat that swayed behind him in the wind like a cape. He carried on walking east towards Sideville, getting ever so slightly closer every step he took, but it was going to take over 1 million steps until he reached his final destination. He was only halfway there, and he still had another 5 hours of walking to do. He couldn't remember life before this journey. It was as if 1 minute he was nothing, and the next minute he was born and ready to do the one thing in his life that he had been born to do. And after that, what would happen to him? Only God knew the answer to that. He carried on striding east down the highway for an additional 5 hours until eventually, at 3:25 a.m, he approached a 4-way junction, turned left down State Street and entered the small village of Sideville. And it was at this point that the night had begun. Chapter 11. The clock nailed to Jared Hall's bedroom wall struck 3:33 a.m. As it did so, Jared swore that he saw it move. He was sitting down in his bedroom with Axel Clegg sitting next to him. Axel had just finished explaining everything that happened to him that night, and now they were sitting in silence and thinking very hard. What are we going to do? Jared kept repeating to himself. What are we going to do? What are we going to do? What the goddamn hell are we going to... All of a sudden, Axel Clegg collapsed to the floor and passed out, as if someone had punched him in the jaw with immense force. Axel? Jared shouted. Crap, Axel! Jared kneeled over him and checked his pulse. It was there. Jared relaxed slightly, but only slightly. Suddenly, he heard shouting and screaming coming from the other room across the hall. Oh no, Jared thought aloud as he jumped up from his squatting position, pressed his ear against the bedroom door, and heard violent screaming and shouting coming from his parents' bedroom. Suddenly, there was a gunshot, and the screaming stopped. Jesus Christ! What the hell is going on? And just when Jared didn't think it could get any worse, he felt Axel's cold arm grip around his neck in a headlock position, and all of a sudden Jared couldn't breathe. Axel! Snap out of it! This isn't you! And this only caused Axel to grip harder. Axel! He shouted for his life now. Suddenly, Jared's bedroom door got pushed open with so much force that the hinges almost got torn apart. And in came Jared's father with a handgun and only one thing on his mind: to kill his son. He had killed his wife, and now he wanted to kill his son. Jared's father, whose name was Mike, suddenly began firing shots, with one of them hitting Axel's right shoulder. Axel quickly let go and fell back against the wall, screaming in pain. Quickly, Jared grabbed Axel and pulled him beside to the bed to take cover from his father's shots. Mike didn't get any more hits on any of them and stopped firing when he realised they were behind the bed. For a split second there was absolute silence until the loud thumping sounds from Mike's heavy boots approached them. The next thing Jared knew was an intense pain in his right shoulder, which felt like he'd been punched with immense force. He looked to his right and saw a knife sticking out of his shoulder, and Axel's grinning face behind it. Quickly, Jared pulled the knife out of his shoulder, screamed in pain, jumped out from behind the bed and tackled his father down to the floor. 1 minute he had been behind the bed thinking that this might be the end, and the next minute he was sitting on top of his dad with the knife, and now all of a sudden he was in control. He decided against it at first, but when he saw his father reach out to grab the gun, which had been knocked out of his hand when Jared tackled him to the ground, Jared felt he had no other choice, so he firmly grabbed his knife in both hands, held it up and pushed it down deep into his father's chest, killing him. He lay beside his dead father for a moment and began to cry, but stopped when he saw Axel charging out towards him from behind the bed and jumping on him with nothing but violence and hatred in his eyes. "Axel, stop this right now!" he shouted, but it didn't make any difference. All he did was make him angrier. Axel punched Jared in the face multiple times, making his face a complete mess. It took a few seconds until Jared realised that he still had a knife in his right hand. He thought, "But I just killed my own father. I don't want to kill my friend as well." But what choice did he have? In a few seconds, if he did nothing, he was going to be beaten to death. So somehow managed to keep his firm grip on the knife he was holding and pushed it straight into Axel's side and pulled it straight out. "Ah!" Axel screamed in agony and rolled off Jared, giving him a chance to get up and run. But he didn't run, couldn't. His face looked a mess and his entire body was in agony. He simply had to crawl away, hoping that someone would come and help him. But no one did come, not for at least half an hour. He crawled downstairs to get away from his dead father and his lunatic friend, went into the downstairs bathroom, locked himself in, prayed for help, and fell unconscious. The time was 3:36 a.m. Chapter 12. The time was 3:05 a.m. when the three entered the barn house, and at first they were disappointed by what they had seen. "So this is it, just rotting wood and a bunch of old hay," Rowan had said, and had searched the whole place, and even went up to the second floor of the barn house, and up there they found nothing but old rotting wood, and that was it. They didn't even see a sight of hay to brighten up the area a bit this time, but what they didn't know was that the three of them would soon all be stuck in there. They had found this out at 3:15 a.m. when they were all about to leave. Rowan had attempted to open the door, but it wouldn't budge, not even an inch. "Rowan, you all right?" Caleb said further back behind him, sounding very scared. "Just give me a minute," Rowan had replied, sounding just as scared. I'll get it this time." Rowan had attempted to open it again, pulling with all his might, but again it didn't move, not even the slightest millimetre. "Okay," Rowan said, more to himself than anyone else. No need to panic. It's just a silly old rotting wooden door. Anyone can break it down." So he took a few steps back, took a deep breath, and ran full speed towards the door, kicking it as hard as he could. Snap! But the snapping sound wasn't the sound of the door breaking off its hinges. The snapping sound was the sound of Rowan Stenhouse's leg snapping in half. He quickly fell to the floor in the worst agonising pain ever, and he screamed so loud that Caleb Hatch and Andrew Keyes nearly went deaf. It was a sort of scream that could break any glass, no matter how strong it was. It was a type of scream that could be heard from 1,000 miles away. Rowan looked down at his leg. The actual bone was sticking out of his shin, and the pain he felt was utterly awful. "Rowan!" Andrew shouted. "Open that goddamn frickin' door! Get us out of this bloody goddamn place!" Rowan shouted in agonising pain. "What, so my leg gets broken as well?" Andrew replied. "No, just get us out of here for God's sake." While all this was being said, Caleb Hatch was slowly cowering backwards, and as he hit the corner of the barn house, he slowly kneeled and began to cry. He closed his eyes and tried to imagine that none of this was happening. He tried to imagine that the devil had never called him, and that he had never come out here at 3 a.m. It was his fault. If it weren't for him, no one would be in this barn house right now. And if his friends wouldn't be doomed to die. And now, because of him, because of stupid, scared Caleb, he would hear his two idiotic friends argue. And that would be it. Then they would all die. "I'm not going to break my leg attempting to open that door. Obviously won't open, Rowan." "Do I look stupid?" Andrew told Rowan, which made him quiet for a few seconds. "Well, how are we going to get out of here then? Teleport?" "I don't know, Rowan. That's what we're trying to figure out, but you're not helping the situation at all, telling me to break my leg." Andrew was getting very annoyed now. "All right, I'm sorry. I only want to get out." "So do we all," Andrew was shouting now. "We all want to get out of this goddamn place, but we can't because this bloody door won't open." Rowan turned his gaze to Caleb, who was in the corner with his head in his knees, crying. What the help is he doing?" Caleb looked up, didn't say anything. "Jesus Christ, Rowan, what help is any of us doing? What the hell are we supposed to do?" "You're the reason why we're out here in the first place," Rowan was talking to Caleb now. "God, when I get my leg fixed, I'm going to mess you up." Caleb looked even more scared now. "Rowan, this isn't helping," Andrew told him. "OK, Andrew, I'll shut up for 5 seconds. And you think of a really good idea." The room fell silent. Andrew thought a while, and then he had an idea. "Maybe we could try the upstairs doors," Andrew suggested. "Why the hell would the upstairs doors be any different?" Rowan replied. "How the frickin' hell will I get up there anyway? I have a bone sticking out of my leg." "Well, you got any better ideas, Rowan?" "To be fair, we can't do anything if we're just going to use that bone sticking out of your leg as an excuse every time I come up with an idea. Me and Caleb could help you up." "What help has Caleb done apart from getting us into this mess and leaving it up to us to try and get out, huh?" "Well, what are we going to do, Rowan? Stay here until we die? Wait till the devil comes for us?" "The devil ain't real," Rowan shouted at him. "We both know you're only saying that. That's what you want to believe, and not what you actually believe. We both know that the devil is real, and that he's very much in this village, maybe even in this barn house as we speak." Rowan shut up for a few seconds before reluctantly saying, "All right, you win. Let's go and try the upstairs doors, but I assure you that they will be locked. There's sure to be some sort of mysterious barrier behind them. But let's go anyway, just because Andrew said so." And with that, they went. They eventually climbed the ladder leading upstairs to the barn house. They got Caleb out of his corner somehow, and somehow Rowan got up, which took 15 minutes, literally, and they were up. Rowan stayed near the ladder and let Andrew and Caleb try to open the door. They walked towards the door very slowly and carefully. "I really hope this door opens," Andrew said to Caleb. "No doubt it won't, though." I'm really sorry we're here," Caleb said. "It's all my fault." "Don't worry about it. If we'd just listened to that Jared in the first place, we wouldn't ever have been considering coming here," Andrew replied. "And don't worry about Rowan. He won't touch you. I'll make sure of it." They were now within touching distance of the door, and a moment later, both of Andrew's hands were on the door. "Here goes nothing," Andrew muttered to himself out loud. "Go on, Andrew, and prove me wrong," Rowan said from behind and chuckled slightly. "And get us out of this bloody place." Ignoring Rowan, he pushed. The door opened. The time struck 37 a.m. Chapter 13. After walking around the village of Sideville for about 10 minutes, the mysterious man stopped before the house and looked up at it. This house of Jared Hall. The mysterious man knew this, and knew that Jared needed help. So he began to make his way towards the house to sort out everything going on in the village of Sideville, and that was what he had come here to do. The time was 3:38 a.m. With grey balding hair and big worn-out hiking boots, the man trampled along the lawn of what was Jared's parents' house, but was now Jared Hall's own house. He walked slowly across the gravel path and approached the front door. When he got there, he firmly grabbed the handle with his right hand, unlocked the door using just the power of his mind, pushed it open, and began to trample inside. He closed the door behind him and stood for a few moments to look around. He was currently standing on the front porch, which led into the living room. He carried on to proceed forward and decided to climb the stairs. The old man could smell a horrible smell of rotting flesh, and it was coming from upstairs. He reached the hallway at the top of the stairs and immediately caught the horrible sight of a rotting corpse with blood spilling out of his chest from what looked like a knife wound. The corpse was the dead body of Jared Hall's father, and the old man knew that. The old man looked down at the dead body for a few seconds. Poor chap, he muttered to himself quietly. Devil must have taken him over too. If only I was just 20 minutes earlier, none of this could have happened. Oh well, there must be a few people left in this village. And just as the old man was starting to think that maybe there was nobody left, he found someone. What had happened was, as the old man was walking through a doorway and around a corner, someone jumped out from nowhere and tackled him to the ground. "Jesus Christ!" the old man yelled as he struggled for his life. "Where the bloody hell did you come from?" The 14-year-old boy who had jumped on top of the old man was Axel Clegg, and Axel was hungry to kill. "The bloody devil has got inside your head, boy. Don't let it win." But nothing the old mysterious man said would do anything. "You've left me no choice. I'm sorry about this, kid." The old man dug into his back pocket and pulled out a sharp piece of metal. This shard of metal is more holy than God. And as he said this, the old man stabbed Axel with it, deep into his leg. Axel let out a wild scream, and with the scream, a part of the devil came out with it. Ah! Axel Clegg fell off the old man and lay on the floor next to him. Eventually, the old man forced himself to get up and slowly walk over to where Axel Clegg lay. "Hey, kid." "Oh, God, please don't be dead." Luckily, he wasn't dead, and now out of the hands of the devil. "What happened?" Axel struggled to say. "And who are you?" "Listen, kid, a lot is going on around this village you don't understand, and I suggest you get out of here right now and don't come back." "No, I know what's going on, and I'm going to stop it. I know that the devil is here, and I know that the devil sleeps in the barn house and lives in the cave, and I know about the devil worshippers that built and named this village Sideville, and somehow also know that you're here to help. So please, let me help too." The old mysterious unknown man stood there, hesitated for a moment, and said, "Fine, let me explain everything. First, my name is Eugene King, and I have been sent here by God to defeat the devil, to have a final battle between good and evil, and send the devil back to where he belongs. Hell." Axel sat there stunned. "So you're like the, second Jesus?" "I guess so, kid." "So what do we do first?" "I guess we find your mate, Jared, that you almost killed." What Axel said? Sounding scared? You don't remember anything that you did? No, 1 minute I was talking to Jared, and the next minute I woke up where you found me. Eugene sighed. I think the devil controlled your mind and made you want to kill anyone you saw. Luckily, I was able to stab you with this shard. Sorry about that, by the way. Eugene pulled out the shard of metal in his back pocket and showed Axel. God gave it to me before I came here and told me that it is extremely holy, so I used it to take part of the devil out of you. Axel Clegg couldn't believe his ears. God and the devil are both real. Heaven, hell are both real. I am speaking to you. Second Jesus Christ right now. What the hell is going on? Axel asked Eugene, not knowing if he wanted to believe it or not. I know this is a lot to take in, Axel, but there's more. What else could you possibly tell me? I killed someone? Eugene looked at him, not knowing what to say. Oh no, Axel stood up. His face went pale as his heartbeat started to increase rapidly. Please tell me I haven't. Oh God, no. Please, Eugene, tell me I haven't. Eugene King could only stand there and wait for Axel Clegg to rush past him into the hallway. Axel screamed. Eugene reluctantly followed Axel out into the hallway and watched him. He was leaning over the body crying. Axel turned around to face Eugene. This is Jared's goddamn father. Can't you bring him back to life? I mean, you're Jesus Christ. You can do that, right? If only I could, Axel. I'm not even God's son. I'm just some guy he chose to defeat the devil. Why me? I'll never know. But I've got a mission to do. And if you want me to help out, then you're going to have to get up and come with me. Jared's father is dead, Axel, and there's nothing that we can do about that. And if we're not quick, then more people are going to turn out just like Jared's father. So come on, let's go, or I'm leaving you here. Axel Clegg took a few seconds, but eventually he got up, stepped over the dead body, and they both began to walk downstairs to find Jared Hall. The time was 3:45 a.m. Chapter 14. Great! This is just fricking great, isn't it? Andrew shouted, more to himself than to Caleb. Calm down, Andrew. You never know, this could lead to a way out, Caleb reassured him, but Andrew wasn't listening. After they'd opened the upstairs door for the barn house, all they could see was a dark tunnel leading to nowhere else but darkness. Screw that, Andrew had said, but before he could begin to walk away from the doors and back down towards Rowan, Andrew and Caleb got sucked straight through and disappeared. Now Andrew and Caleb were stuck with no way back to the barn house and nothing but a tunnel leading to eternal darkness in front of them. And for Caleb, there was also the sound of Andrew swearing his head off. Eventually Caleb started to get even more annoyed than Andrew. Look, Andrew, swearing and getting all annoyed isn't going to help us. What is going to help is if we try to move on and find a way out of here. But first, before we do any of that, please can you shut the hell up? Sorry, Caleb, I'm just annoyed because we're stuck in this weird place. Probably we'd be about to be killed by the goddamn devil, and it's all because of some moron named Caleb Hatch. Andrew, look, I know it's all my fault, but what can we do about it? We can't change the past, so let's just move on and try and get out of this mess. Andrew looked at Caleb for a few moments, not knowing what to come back with, before saying, All right, Caleb, since you seem to know exactly what to do, find the way out. Shut up, Andrew. Stop acting like Rowan and follow me. Caleb began to walk down the tunnel, and Andrew reluctantly followed behind him. Rowan Stenhouse just barely lay conscious at the bottom of the upstairs of the barn house, laying against the rotting wooden wall at the back, opposite to the wall where the doors that Caleb and Andrew had just got sucked through. What the hell? After Caleb and Andrew got sucked through the doors, and the doors shut behind them, Rowan could not believe what he had just witnessed. Andrew? Caleb? Rowan wanted to run towards the doors and pull them wide open, but he remembered his leg, bloody leg. He couldn't do anything because of his leg. But that wasn't the worst thing about it. The worst thing about it was the horrific pain that put him through. Half of his tibia, shin bone, had broken in half, and half of it was piercing through his skin. You could see the bone sticking out of his leg. There wasn't much else in the world which was more painful than the pain Rowan felt in his right leg right now. However, above all, nothing was worse than the fear he felt. Rowan knew that the devil had complete control over not just him, Andrew and Caleb, but probably the entire village, and he knew that the devil could kill him and his idiotic friends whenever it felt like it. All he could do now was wait and hope that someone would come and put a stop to all this. Someone who could defeat the devil. But the only thing that could defeat the devil was God. Or maybe someone similar to God. Maybe someone like Eugene King. Rowan glanced at his watch. The time read 3:40 a.m. They saw the light. It wasn't much light since it was 3 a.m, but it was a lot lighter than the cave, so Caleb and Andrew could see it. It was a light of the outside world. Oh my God, Andrew, look! It's the outside! It's the frickin' outside! Caleb jumped around hysterically as Andrew stood there looking out in front of Caleb, amazed. There was a chance that maybe, just maybe, they could get out. It was only a very tiny chance, but there was still a chance. Don't get too excited, Caleb. We're in the hands of the devil here, remember? Anything could happen. Just keep walking forward and hope for the best. They carried on. A few minutes later, Andrew thought he heard a noise behind them. He turned around and saw or heard nothing more. He dismissed the sound and carried on, not thinking much of it. They continued onwards through the cave. The exit seemed so close now. And that's when Andrew heard it again, but louder this time, and a lot closer. He turned around. "I know there's someone there," he shouted, sounding surprisingly brave. "Andrew, what's wrong?" "I heard a noise behind us, that time, Caleb. I'm 100% sure of it." "What did it sound like?" "It was footsteps very close behind us. It scared me. I thought I heard it earlier, but it was too quiet for me to think about anything of it." "Maybe we should try and keep going, but at a slightly faster pace." "Yeah, come on, let's go. I don't want to spend any more time in here than we have to." It started as a fast walk, but soon it turned into a run. Andrew and Caleb were terrified and running for their lives. Suddenly, just as they were running out of the exit, they tripped and everything went black. Andrew and Caleb tripped over a stone or a twig, though they tripped over the evil spirit of Chester Woodward, the man who gave the devil a home. Meanwhile, back at the barn house, Rowan had passed out. Rowan dreamed about the cave, Andrew, Caleb, and Chester Woodward. Caleb and Andrew were in the cave, tied up, unconscious. Satanic symbols were written all over the floor beneath them. Chester Woodward was on the outside of the satanic symbols and was whispering words under his breath. Eventually Caleb woke up. The first thing he noticed was the floor covered in satanic letters and symbols. The second thing he noticed was Chester Woodward himself. "Hey, who the hell are you?" Caleb shouted and caused Andrew to wake up. Andrew screamed for help. "Shut up, Andrew. There's no one to help." Surprisingly, Chester began to talk. "I'm the one who summoned the devil to this village, and I'm the one who sacrificed my life to give the devil a home. That home is the barn house, and I'm punishing you for entering it. And once I'm done, I will do the same to your friend Rohan Stenhouse." "What are you going to do to us?" Andrew asked. "I'm going to set alight that rope that is holding you both together, and then I'm going to summon you both to hell to burn forever." Surprisingly, none of them screamed. They just sat there feeling hopeless, wishing that this whole thing was a dream. Suddenly, Rowan woke up with a fright and he too was wishing that it was all a dream. The time struck 3:50 a.m. Chapter 15. At 3:46 a.m, Eugene King and Axel Clegg found Jared Hall. He had passed out on the cold bathroom floor and was so still that for a moment Axel thought that he might have been dead. Eugene bent down to where Jared lay and tried to wake him up. Eventually his eyes began to open, and Axel felt slightly relieved. "Jared?" Eugene asked as Jared started to gain full consciousness. "Jared, are you okay, my boy?" Jared looked around and jumped back. "Who are you?" he said, sounding worried. "It's all right, Jared. I'm here to help." Eugene tried to sound as friendly as possible. "I know about the devil, and I'm here to defeat it." Jared took a glance behind Eugene and saw Axel Clegg. "No, it's Axel. He tried to kill me." "It's okay, Jared. The devil got into his head, but I managed to get it out. Axel is just as friendly as he was before any of this happened." "Why should I trust you?" "Because if you don't, you're going to die. The devil will come, and it will kill you. So come on, let's go, please." Jared looked from Eugene to Axel and looked back at Eugene. "Fine, let's go." And so they left. Two 14-year-old kids and an old man set out to try and defeat the devil. What could go wrong? The three were standing near the inside of the front door of Jared's house, trying desperately to come up with an idea. "I say we go to the barn house," Axel began. "Rowan, Caleb and Andrew are all stuck in there. We should start with getting more people to help us." "What sort of help would they do?" Jared told Axel, slightly annoyed. "A bunch of idiots. They would probably laugh at us if we told them we needed to help fighting the devil. Look, it's to Eugene what we do. But going to the barn house is a complete waste of time." They were silent for a few seconds before Eugene spoke. "We're going to that cave. That's where the devil lives. At the moment, the devil will be roaming the streets. But once its hour is over, we'll need to go back to the cave. We should wait there for it. And then we can. Eugene trailed off. "How the hell are we going to defeat the devil? This goddamn devil we're talking about here. Arguably just as powerful as God." Axel and Jared didn't know what to say. "What on earth am I doing here? I'm just a silly old man." "How about we go to the cave and see what happens, eh? Make it up as we go along," Jared suggested. "That's probably the worst idea I think I've ever heard, but I can't think of anything else to do, so I'm going to have to agree with Jared here," replied Axel. The old man looked worried. "What the hell am I going to do here? And why on earth did God send me?" Were the two questions that kept repeating in his mind over and over again. Screw it, he thought. "All right, let's go to the cave." And with that, they left. They arrived at the entrance of the cave at 3:50 a.m. "Well, this is it," Eugene muttered under his breath. "Shall we enter?" Eugene asked. "Yeah, let's go," Jared replied, sounding scared, and very slowly the three entered the devil's cave. After walking through the cave for about 5 minutes, they still hadn't seen anything. But all of a sudden Axel saw something. "Look!" he shouted excitedly. "There's a light!" He was right. Eugene and Jared could see it now as well. As they neared closer and closer, they could slowly start to see that the light was from a torch resting against the wall. Axel was the first to notice what sat below the torch, though. "Crap, look! It's Andrew and Caleb," he shouted. His shouting caught Andrew and Caleb's attention, and they started to shout back at them for help. Meanwhile, Axel, Jared, and Eugene started to sprint towards them. "Axel! Jared! Help!" they shouted as they got closer. Within seconds, the three of them reached Andrew and Caleb and immediately began untying the rope. You've got to be quick, Andrew shouted. He's going to be here any minute now. Who? The devil? Asked Axel. No, Chester Woodward. I don't know who he is, but he's not nice. He's going to burn the rope that's around us and send us to hell. Jared stopped untying the rope for a few seconds. Chester Woodward, he said, scared. He was the one of the devil worshippers that built this village. He was one of the people who summoned the devil. Jared immediately went back to untying the rope as soon as he realised he had stopped. Sorry, I just ain't heard that name in a very long time. Eugene saw that they were taking way too long to untie the rope, so he came in to help, and the rope immediately became untied. As Andrew and Caleb stood up, Andrew asked, "Who are you?" "He's a friend, Andrew. He's here to help," Jared replied for Eugene. "I'm keeping an eye on you," Andrew told Eugene. Eugene said nothing. "Now come on. Let's go, quick." Andrew checked his watch. 3:58 a.m. Andrew, Jared, Caleb, Axel and Eugene ran, hoping to get out. But they all knew that their wish was very unlikely to happen. Meanwhile, the devil was making his way home. Chapter 16. The village of Sideville was a mess. Every single building had at least 1 or 2 dead bodies, either killed by the devil or killed by a friend or a close family relative who had gone insane. Those alive were completely insane, would kill whatever they saw in the worst way possible. Only a few people didn't go crazy. These people were Eugene King, Jared Hall, Axel Clegg, Andrew Keyes, Caleb Hatch, Rowan Stenhouse, and the other 2 people named Roderick Branson and his girlfriend Tracy Lindsay. They had both awoken at 3:33 a.m. by a screaming and shouting coming from Roderick's parents' bedroom. It sounded like someone was being murdered, and they were soon to find out that someone was being murdered. It was very similar to what happened at Jared's house. First, there were screams from the parents' bedroom. Then, one of them came out and got killed by their son. And the same happened at Branson's house. Roderick's father had stormed out with a knife and tried to kill his son, Roderick Branson. Roderick fought back, got his father to the ground, and killed him by stabbing him in the heart with his father's knife. He lay on the ground for a few moments, recalling what on earth just happened, and then went to see if his girlfriend was all right. He found her in the corner of the room with her head in her knees, crying. And that was the story of the other 2 people in the village who were still alive and weren't crazy. Everyone else was either physically dead or mentally dead. Roderick and Tracy eventually calmed down. After about 25 minutes, they planned to stay where they were until the morning. Meanwhile, the devil was walking back to his cave. With an evil grin on his face, the devil was well pleased. The time had struck 4 a.m. Chapter 17. The group of 5 could now see the exit of the cave. "Follow me, we're nearly there," Andrew told everyone. Jared was right behind Andrew, getting annoyed by his bossiness, so he walked beside him to speak. "We have someone here sent by God, and we have me, who knew all about this before any of it happened. So why on earth do you think you should be in charge of us? You didn't even believe in the devil less than an hour ago." Jared and Andrew stopped and faced each other. "Because I'm not a moron, and I know the best decisions to make. The only decision you've made so far is to go to the barn house and try and get yourself and your 2 idiotic friends killed." "Shut up, Jared. If you want to survive, you've got to listen to me. Last time Caleb listened to you, you both got tied up by a devil worshipper who died centuries ago and nearly got sent to frickin' hell." Andrew pushed Jared, and Jared ran up to Andrew and tackled him down to the ground with extreme strength. He sat on top of him and started beating him to death. Axel, who was walking right behind them both, instantly jumped on top of them and tried to get Jared off. "Oi, pack it in!" Eugene stepped in and tried to sort them out, but nothing was going to stop Jared. He was annoyed, and Andrew deserved this. One moment he's getting himself killed, and the next moment he thinks everyone will listen to him. Who does he think he is, for crying out loud? All of this was happening while Caleb Hatch was slowly walking backward. It was nothing to do with the fight. He saw something in the distance, so he quickly turned around and ran back down the tunnel, away from everyone. Eventually, Eugene noticed it too.
Look, it's here.
The others turned and looked. He was right. The devil was returning home, satisfied after another night's work of killing everyone in the village. Jared noticed it last and quickly jumped up and ran off towards Axel and Eugene, who were already following Caleb. Eventually, Axel noticed they had left Andrew. "We've got to get him back," he shouted, but they wouldn't let him. "There's not enough time," Jared told him. "I'm sorry, it's my fault, but there's no time. We need to go." But Axel wasn't having any of it. "I hope the devil gets you and you live in eternity in hell," he shouted and started to run towards Andrew. "Don't worry, Andrew. I'm going to save you." "For God's sake," Jared muttered under his breath before being forced to chase after him. "No, Axel, there's no time," Jared shouted, leaving Eugene King on his own, not knowing what to do. What should I do, he thought. Run off towards Caleb? Stop Jared and Axel? Or stay and fight the devil? "Andrew, we're not leaving without you," Axel shouted. "Come back, Axel. There's no time. We need to go," Jared was shouting. And not much further in front of Andrew was the devil, with a big evil grin on its face. Eventually, Eugene made up his mind. He ignored what everyone else was doing and walked straight towards the devil. "God chose me, so I should be able to defeat the devil. That's why I'm here, right?" And so Eugene started to run, and that's when Axel and Jared noticed Eugene. "What are you doing?" Axel shouted. "You two help Andrew. I've got this," Eugene replied. Axel and Jared trusted him and let him do what he needed to do as they went to help Andrew. Before long, Eugene King was standing before the devil. "I'm going to send you back to where you belong, Satan, in hell." The devil stood grinning at him and spoke. "How on earth are you going to do that?" "With the power of God." "God has no power over what happens on earth, and neither do I, until some people summoned me here right in this cave over 200 years ago. I'm going to kill you and your stupid friends. I'm going to send you all to live eternity to burn in hell. And then this village will be forever mine." Eugene was scared now. He didn't know what to do. He began by slowly cowering back before he turned around and saw Axel, Jared and Andrew running off in the distance, and followed behind them. Eugene sprinted away as fast as he could, but the devil was very quickly catching up. The devil was pretty much on top of him when all of a sudden it felt as if the devil had suddenly vanished. Eugene stopped and very slowly and cautiously turned around. Out of nowhere, Chester Woodward had come and tackled the devil to the ground. "What's going on?" he thought as he ran off towards the others while he had the chance. He was a lot faster than the group of kids, so he caught them up quickly. "Eugene," Axel shouted as they were running. "What happened?" "Can we talk about it when we get somewhere safe? I'm out of breath." "Sure," Axel replied and carried on. They ran for quite a lot longer until eventually they found a dead end and a wooden door at the end, and standing before it they found Caleb Hatch. "Caleb!" Jared shouted. Jared saw him first because he was running a few metres in front of everyone else. Jared approached Caleb, grabbed his shoulder, twisted him round and faced him. A couple of seconds later the others arrived behind Jared. "The door," Caleb said, sounding scared as he pointed towards it. "It's the same door that was on the barn house. I'm afraid it may lead to the barn house." "Well, let's go in and find out," Jared replied. "No, Jared, I'm not going back in there." "Well, it's either that or we stay here and die." "You can all go, but I'm not going anywhere near that damn barn house again." "Caleb," Jared began, but it was no use. Caleb wasn't going in. "I guess it's just us then," Caleb said as he turned around. but everyone else had suddenly disappeared. "Caleb! Where'd they go?" Jared shouted. "Huh?" Caleb looked up and also saw that they were all gone. "Where'd they go?" "I don't know," Jared shouted back, worried. "They better not be playing tricks on us," Caleb said, annoyed. "They wouldn't be. Being hunted down by the freaking devil isn't much of a laughing matter, is it?" "I guess not. But where did they go?" "I don't know." They were silent for a moment. "I'm sorry, Caleb, but we're going to have to go through that door right now." "I already said I'm not going back into that barn house." "Well, you have no choice. Now come on. You first, and hurry up before anything happens." Caleb sighed and then opened the door. It led to the upstairs of the barn house. It was the same door that Andrew had entered through to get into the cave in the first place. "I'm right behind you," Jared told him. And they went through. Part 3. The Build-Up. Chapter 18. Shortly after he tackled the devil to the ground, the devil took complete control of Chester Woodward. And now he would do what the devil demanded. The devil was slowly starting to build an army, and a true army of evilness. And that's also when someone else came. Someone else to join the devil's army. Glenn Rogers was the evilest person, not just in southern Nevada, but also in the entire United States. He lived in Las Vegas his whole life and was a mass murderer, a psycho killer, rapist, cannibal, and had killed over 500 people and was never caught. He may have been mentally insane, but he wasn't stupid and knew how to cover his tracks very well. The devil knew of Glenn, and Glenn knew of the devil. They were both very similar and were both as evil as each other. The devil liked Glenn and Glenn liked the devil, so the devil controlled his mind too, on the very same night as he did to everyone else in Sideville. And so Glenn headed towards Sideville that night. He had left Las Vegas at 1 a.m. before anything happened in Sideville, and by 3 a.m. he was cruising up Route 15 through St. George, Utah, and on his way up towards Sideville, Nebraska, with another 12 hours to go. By 3 p.m. Glenn Rogers would be due to arrive. After an hour of passing through the town of St. George, Glenn Rogers pulled into a Chevron gas station just off Route 15 to fill up. He pulled his blue Ford pickup truck into the station, slowed to a stop next to one of the gas pumps, and got out of his car, plunged the nozzle of the pump into the Ford and began filling up with gas. Once he'd finished filling up, he grabbed his Colt 45 out of the back seat of his pickup and began to make his way towards the Chevron shop. The young cashier paused the next Netflix show he was watching and looked up towards the old, tough-looking man who had just entered the shop. The man just stood and stared into the cashier's eyes. "Can I get you anything?" the cashier asked and sniggered mockingly. Glenn just stared back at the cashier and said nothing. "Hey man, I haven't got all day," the cashier said, annoyed, and frowned at him. A few more seconds passed until Glenn Rogers held his revolver up to the cashier's head and said, "Give me some gas. All the money in the cash register and a packet of tangy cheese Doritos." The young cashier's face went from agitated to terrified in seconds. Okay, here's all the money I've got," the cashier said as he opened the register and took out all of the money. "Here, man, take it all. Just, please don't hurt me." "Put the damn money on the counter instead of shoving it in my face, and give me some tangy cheese Doritos," Glenn shouted. "And I will not pay for any of the gas, if that's what you're thinking." The cashier ran to the crisp aisle and searched for the tangy cheese Doritos. "There's none left," he thought to himself. Then he noticed that they were all out of tangy cheese Doritos. Is there Seriously, none left? He walked back to the man, who looked furious. Where's the Doritos? He screamed at the cashier. We've run out, sir, he struggled to tell the man. Jesus Christ! Glenn muttered as he pulled the trigger up to the cashier's head and pulled it. The cashier quickly squatted down, ducked behind the aisle and crawled away hiding. You can't hide forever, Glenn shouted while he slowly walking down each aisle, trying desperately to look for him. After a while of looking for the cashier, but having no luck trying to find him, he walked outside, went to his car, he went to his back seat and got a can of gasoline and walked back into the shop. You sure you don't want to come out now and have an easier death? Glenn asked. No response. Fine, have it your way. And he began to pour gasoline all over the shop floor. He went around the whole building, behind the counter, between the aisles, in the staff room, in the toilets. And once he was done, he collected all the money from behind the counter, grabbed his lighter from his back pocket, went to the front door, shouted, Goodbye, you stupid selfish little cashier, and he lit the place up. He ran to his car quickly, got inside and drove off, with the Chevron gas station blowing up in the distance behind him. With exactly what he went in there for, well, everything apart from the tangy cheese Doritos. Gas and money, but no tangy cheese Doritos. I could be enjoying them right now, he thought to himself as he carried on down the highway towards the distant village of Sideville. He thought, what could possibly go wrong? Chapter 19. Before Rowan Stenhouse woke up to the sight of Caleb and Jared, he had had a dream that warned of the coming of Glenn Rogers, but also gave hope that another man by the name of Tommy Rogers would come. Tommy Rogers was Glenn Rogers' brother, but was very different from Glenn. While Glenn Rogers would kill people in the most brutal and horrible ways, Tommy Rogers would save people from ones like Glenn Rogers. But one thing Tommy tried to do the most was stopping his brother Glenn and getting him into prison for life. That's where he belonged. And when he died, he belonged in hell to suffer for all eternity. But none of that would ever happen if Tommy never found Glenn, and that is what he had tried to do his whole life. Tommy Rogers was a detective that worked for himself and only ever worked on one case, the Glenn Rogers case. But there was one night when Tommy found Glenn. It was a night that the devil called for him. The night that Glenn began to travel up to Sideville. It all began at 11:30 p.m, an hour and a half before Glenn began his journey. Tommy was shutting off his laptop and getting ready for bed when, as he was closing his blind, he glanced out of his window and saw no other than Glenn Rogers himself, sitting in a car parked just outside Tommy's house. Jesus Christ! He almost shouted to himself. I've been searching for you my whole life, he muttered to himself and crouched down behind the window. I have to go out there and chase him down, he thought to himself. Tommy quickly put his clothes back on and ran downstairs to the front door. He opened his front door silently, crept outside, trying desperately not to be seen, and hid behind a stone wall that separated his driveway from the road. And on the other side of the road was the car that Glenn Rogers was sitting in. He was now just a few metres away from Glenn, who was sitting in his car and seemed to be texting someone. What do I do now? He thought to himself. A few minutes later he came up with a plan. He would somehow place a tracker onto Glenn's car. He would wait for Glenn to drive off, and then he would carefully get into his own car and follow Glenn from a safe distance. It wasn't amazing, but it was the best he could think of. What else could he do? Quickly, but silently, he tiptoed to the front door of his house, somehow opened the door and walked in without being seen, and ran to his study. He ran over to the cabinet just to the right of his desks, went down to the bottom shelf, grabbed a GPS tracker and some duct tape, and ran back outside. Once he was back behind the stone wall he crouched behind earlier, he was glad to see that Glenn was still there, sitting in his car. He waited a few moments until he was ready, and then ran, still crouching, and took cover behind Glenn's car. This is crazy, he thought to himself, and then stuck the GPS tracker to the bottom of Glenn's car with some duct tape that he had, and ran back behind the stone wall and waited, all without being seen. Tommy Rogers waited behind the stone wall for about 10 minutes before going inside the house to wait in there. And after what felt like an additional 20 minutes, Glenn finally drove off into the distance. Tommy waited about 5 minutes until Glenn was quite a while away, before going outside, getting in his car and placing the GPS tracker on his dashboard and driving off in the direction of his brother, Glenn Rogers. The clock struck midnight. "Give me the money," Glenn demanded. I told you I don't have it right now. Give me a few months and I might have it," the man named Jamie Maynard told him. The two men were standing down the dark alley where Jamie had promised Glenn the money he owed him. "I've already given you ages to get the money, so give it to me now, or there's going to be trouble," Glenn shouted. "I told you I don't have it." "Well, then there's going to be trouble, I guess," Glenn told the man as he pulled his trusty .45 Colt revolver out of his back pocket and aimed it at Jamie. Suddenly, a voice came from behind Glenn. "Glenn Rogers, put the gun down right now, or there's going to be real trouble." Glenn Rogers turned around. It was Tommy Rogers. He had tracked down Glenn and now found him. They stared at each other silently. "Drop the gun and come with me," Tommy repeated. Glenn hesitated before doing what he was told. "You're making the right choice, Glenn," Tommy told Glenn as he led him to his car. Tommy opened the door to the back seat of his car and told Glenn to get in. Glenn, again, did as he was told. Tommy told Jamie that he was free to go, and they went back to his car and got in the driver's seat. "I'm here to help you, Glenn." "No, you're not. You're going to send me to that mental asylum for the rest of my life and the rest of my days." Tommy didn't know how to reply, so he shut up, started the car, and began to drive off. When the time hit 1 a.m, Tommy regretted ever catching Glenn. 1 a.m. was when the devil took control of Glenn. "Kill him," a voice told Glenn. "Kill him and come to Sideville. I'll lead the way." The voice spoke again. This was the voice of the devil. "Yes, master," he answered the voice. "I will do whatever you say, master." Glenn looked around the back seat of the car. Nothing. "I guess I'll just have to put him in a headlock then," he told himself. One moment Tommy was driving along the highway, and the next moment he was being strangled to death by his brother. Tommy tried to speak, but couldn't, and the next moment Tommy had passed out, and the car was about to crash. Glenn quickly opened the door and jumped out while the car was still going at 50 miles per hour. Glenn lay on the side of the highway for a few moments trying to recover from the impact of hitting the ground, when the voice came again. "I'll heal you. Just have to find a vehicle and get to Sideville as soon as possible." "Yes, master," Glenn replied again. He watched his brother's car roll off the highway, crash into a tree and go up into flames, with his brother, Tommy Rogers, still in the vehicle. "I hope you burn in hell," Glenn muttered under his breath as he began to walk down the highway, hoping for a car to pass by. Only 5 minutes later, Glenn found a vehicle parked up on the side of the road. The driver's window was slightly open and the keys were plunged into the ignition. "Thank you, master, for putting me in this fabulous vehicle here," he told the devil. It was exactly what he needed. It was a brand new shiny blue Ford pickup truck. And he even found a can of gasoline in the back seat. "I could blow up a few places with that," he thought to himself. Glenn liked blowing stuff up. Glenn loved blowing stuff up, with people inside even more. Glenn loved to torture people, and Glenn loved to kill people because Glenn was mentally insane. And when he finally teamed up with the devil, no one was going to be safe. Glenn got into the driver's seat of the pickup truck and drove off. "What a lovely peaceful night," he thought to himself. Chapter 20. Rowan Stenhouse woke up from the warning of Glenn Rogers and saw Caleb Hatch approaching him. "Caleb? Is that you?" Caleb, ignoring Rowan, rushed over to him and kneeled beside him. "Rowan, you look awful. Are you going to be all right?" I think I'm going to die, Caleb," Rowan just about managed to say. "No, Rowan. You're going to be fine. Just stay with us and we'll get you out of here and straight into hospital as soon as we can." Jared approached from behind and looked down at Rowan. Rowan noticed Jared and looked back up at him. "Jared? I'm sorry, Jared. We should have listened to you. I admit it. I was wrong. The devil is real and he lives here. Not just in this barn house, but in this village." "Don't worry about it, Rowan. Anyone would have laughed at me. I don't know what I was thinking. Why would anyone believe me when I said the devil was in Sideville?" Rowan turned his glance back to Caleb. "Caleb?" "Yes, Rowan. I think I'm gonna. Rowan fell unconscious. "Rowan!" Caleb shouted. "Rowan, stay with us, buddy! Rowan! Rowan! Rowan!" "I think he's dead, Caleb. Caleb, I think he's..." "Don't say that, Jared. He's not dead." Caleb began to cry. "He's not dead." "I think he is, Caleb." Jared was on the edge of tears himself now. "I think he is." Caleb was now kneeling over the dead body of Rowan Stenhouse crying, and Jared was standing behind Caleb with tears forming in his eyes. After about 5 minutes, Caleb turned his head and faced Jared with tears streaming down his face. It's all my fault, Jared. It was my idea to come to the bloody barn house 3 a.m. in the first place." "Blaming this on yourself is only going to make things worse, Caleb. How about we try and move on and figure out how we're going to get out of here?" "Move on? My friend just died. And we're just going to move on and forget about it?" "Well, I don't know about you, Caleb, but I plan on getting out of here." Jared began to raise his voice now, and it caused Caleb to calm down. "I'm sorry, Jared. You're right. Let's try and get the hell out of this goddamn place." Caleb stood up and led Jared towards the ladder leading to the downstairs of the barn house. They walked over to it and descended down the ladder. "Let's try the front door," Jared suggested. "I doubt it will work, Jared, but it's worth a try, I guess." They began to walk towards the front door. "Oh, Jared?" "Yeah?" If it's locked, don't try and kick it down." "Why?" Jared questioned, confused. "You'll end up like Rowan. That's how he's got a bone sticking out of his leg." "Oh well, we might not have a choice, Caleb." "Jared, I'm being serious. Please don't." They faced each other, and Jared could see that Caleb was begging him. "All right, Caleb, fine." Jared approached the door, firmly grasped both hands onto the rotting wooden handles, and pulled. They were locked. "Ah, crap. What do we do now?" Jared asked. "We find another way," Caleb said. They looked at each other for a while before Jared spoke. "I'm breaking down the door, Caleb." "No," Caleb shouted. "You'll end up dead, just like Rowan." "All right then, Caleb. What else are we going to do?" "I don't know." "Well, I'm breaking the damn door down." You know what, Jared? Go right ahead. Prove me wrong." "All right," Jared replied. "I will." Jared took a few steps back, took a deep breath in and a deep breath out. "Come on, Jared," he told himself. "It's just an old rotting wooden door." He took another deep breath in and out and began to charge towards the door. When he was just a few paces before the door, he lifted his right leg and kicked the 2 double doors as hard as he could. The doors flung wide open. Jared bolted straight through, and Caleb couldn't believe his eyes. Chapter 21. As the sun was beginning to rise in Sideville, the night was gradually closing to an end. The population of Sideville had gone from about 400 to 10 in one night. Every house held about 3 to 4 dead bodies, and outside the village was a complete mess. Caleb Hatch and Jared Hall were 2 of the survivors. After breaking out of the barn house, they quickly rushed back to Jared's house and stayed there until the morning, waiting for the sun to rise, if it ever would. Roderick Branson and Tracy Lindsay were another 2 survivors. After being rudely interrupted by Roderick's father, who had tried to kill them, they had locked themselves inside Roderick's bedroom and also stayed there patiently waiting for the sun to rise. Another one of the survivors was named Ray Peck. He was one of the people who had been mind-controlled by the devil and had tried to kill everyone in Sideville. However, Ray Peck was the last one left. All the others had either been killed by other people, mind-controlled by the devil, or killed by Ray Peck. The other 5 were currently inside the cave. 3 of them were being held hostage, and the other 2 were keeping them hostage. The 3 being held hostage were Axel Clegg, Andrew Keyes, and Eugene King. The 2 who were holding them hostage were the devil itself and his companion Chester Woodward. Axel, Andrew, and Eugene were all unconscious and would stay that way until morning. And they were the 10 that made up the entire population of Sideville. Eventually, the clock struck 6 a.m. and the sun rose, and a new day began in Sideville. Another day of violence, pain, and horror. Chapter 22. Roderick, wake up! Tracy, what's wrong? Roderick asked as he got up and rubbed his eyes. Roderick, someone's trying to break in. What? Someone's trying to knock the front door down, Tracy whispered loudly. They both listened carefully. Bang! 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 She was right. Someone was banging on the door, trying to break in. I'll go down, Roderick told her. Stay here. But Roderick... No matter what, stay here, Roderick told her. I'll be fine, Tracy, I promise. Just stay here, okay? Okay, just be careful. I will. He gave Tracy a reassuring smile and left the bedroom. He walked past his parents' bedroom to grab a baseball bat from underneath their bed and almost threw up when he saw his mum's dead body. There was a bullet hole going all the way through her head. He grabbed the baseball bat as quickly as he could and sprinted out. Once he descended the stairs, he walked towards the front door, but from the inside he couldn't see anyone out there. Hello? He said out loud to the door. He listened very carefully to the other side of the door, but couldn't hear anyone. I'm going to have to go out there, he thought to himself. Hello? He asked the second time, but again, no response. Roderick approached the door. When he got close enough, he grabbed the key out of the keypot, slotted the key into the lock, and turned the key and opened the door. He stepped outside, but couldn't see anyone. Hello? He asked the third time, but again no response. He searched around for a little while, and when he was just about to go back inside, a cold arm wrapped around his neck from behind and started to strangle him. Ah! He tried shouting, but no sound would exit his mouth. I'm going to die, he thought to himself. Jesus Christ, I'm going to die. All of a sudden, a ghost appeared in front of his eyes. It was the ghost of Tommy Rogers. Tommy was looking at the man behind Roderick and muttered something in a different language to the man. The ghost of Tommy Rogers disappeared, and the man let go of Roderick and fell to the floor. Roderick turned around to face the man. Who are you? Where am I? The man asked Roderick. You just tried to kill me, Roderick shouted. Did I? I can't remember anything. I went to bed last night and I've just woken up here. The hell is going on? Roderick said out loud, more to himself than to the man. Hey, why don't we carry on this conversation inside? Yeah, good idea. Roderick helped the man up and led him inside. The man who had tried to kill Roderick Branson was named Ray Peck. Ray Peck was the last man standing, out of all the people who got mind-controlled by the devil. Roderick explained everything about what had happened, about his dad trying to kill him and Tracy, about how Ray tried to kill him, and about the weird ghost that appeared in front of them both and took the mind control from Ray. None of them knew what was going on. None of them knew about the devil, about the barn house, or about the cave, about Glen Rogers, nothing. But they were soon to find out everything. They just had to find the others. All the good people had to find each other and team up for the final battle between good and evil. Chapter 23. While Ray Peck was attacking Roderick Branson, Axel Clegg was waking up. It was 6 a.m, but could have been 12 a.m, or 12 p.m. for all Axel knew. This was because Axel found himself inside a cave, the Devil's Cave. Fear had struck him even before the very dim light of the cave had struck his eyes. And he looked around and saw 2 horrifying dead bodies sat up against a hard, cold wall either side of him. Axel screamed, and his scream echoed around the walls and caused the 2 dead bodies to awaken. And that was when he realised that they weren't dead bodies at all, but very much alive bodies of his friends, Andrew Keyes and Eugene King. They just looked so dead. Their skin was pale, they were covered in blood, and when they slept they lay so still that you could hardly see any breathing. Axel, Andrew was just about to say, "Axel, I think I'm going to die." Axel looked to his left towards Andrew. "Andrew, you're going to be fine. Just stay with us and we'll get out of this cave, out of this village, and get you to a hospital as quick as we can, okay?" "Sure," Andrew replied, not very convinced. Axel turned to his right towards Eugene. "Any idea what we could do?" "Well, the first thing we've got to do is get out of this chain." Axel turned round and noticed that some chain, which was on one of the connected to the walls, and the other end was connected to their hands. There was also a lock attached to the chain. "I do know how to pick locks," Eugene added, "but I ain't got nothing to picklock it with. Have you?" Axel checked his pockets. Nothing. He turned to his left and asked Andrew to check his pockets, but again, nothing. "Well, if we can't get out, then we're screwed," Eugene told both. Suddenly, they were both interrupted by a noise coming from down the hallway. "Shh!" Eugene told them both. "Don't make a sound." They could hear approaching footsteps coming from down the hallway, and in the distance they could see 2 glowing, demonic, evil-looking eyes. The pair of eyes were slowly getting bigger and slowly getting closer. "Oh, crap! What do we do?" Andrew asked. "Shut up, Andrew. Stay still and don't move," Axel quietly shouted at him. They all sat silent, staring at the approaching figure in the distance, dreadfully waited for it to arrive. Suddenly, the good man arrived. He was pure good, but he was the brother of pure evil. The man was Tommy Rogers, and he came from nowhere, almost as if he had just appeared out of thin air. As soon as the good man came, he glanced at Axel, Andrew and Eugene, gave them a reassuring look, and charged towards the figure down the hallway. "What now?" Andrew asked. "I think we should wait and see what he does," Eugene answered. I like the look of this guy." Tommy Rogers stormed towards the dark, demonic figure, stopped before it and stared at it. Eventually Tommy said something that Axel, Andrew and Eugene couldn't quite hear, and stared at the figure. None of them had any idea what Tommy had said to the dark figure, but it must have been quite threatening because, to their surprise, it caused the dark figure to disappear. After that, the good man turned around to face the 3 hostages and began to walk towards them. When they were close enough to hear each other, Eugene asked, "Who are you?" "My name is Tommy Rogers, and I'm here to help," the good man replied. "And by the way, you're probably going to need this." Tommy Rogers pulled a few paper clips out of his pocket and dropped them on the floor next to Eugene's foot. "Thank you," Eugene had tried to say, but no sound came out of his mouth, and he said it so quietly that Axel, sitting next to him, couldn't even hear him. Axel turned his head towards Eugene. "You said you can pick locks, right?" Yeah, sure," Eugene replied. "Well, then let's get the hell out of here," Andrew butted in. Eugene quickly turned around, grabbed the padlock behind him and started desperately trying to free himself. "I've been stuck in this place since the population of Sideville was still in the thousands," Andrew stated. "I've been stuck here since me, Caleb and Rowan first entered the barn house all those hours ago. Just after Rowan beat me up, Axel asked. I wonder how Rowan is right now. I hope he's dead. Twat." "Hey guys, look," Eugene interrupted. Axel and Andrew turned their heads. "I'm free," Eugene exclaimed as he held up his arms excitedly. "Great. Now get a move on and free us," Andrew demanded. "Andrew, stop acting like Rowan. And just be lucky that Eugene knows how to free us." Andrew sat up and Eugene began freeing Axel. After he got Axel free, he walked over to Andrew and began to free him. Once they were all out, they stood up, stared down the hallway and began to walk towards it, hoping to finally escape the damn cave. Chapter 24. The time was 8:30 p.m. when Glenn Rogers cruised into the state of Colorado. Colorado was the 4th state he'd been in since he started his journey. After Glenn murdered his brother Tommy Rogers and found the Ford pickup truck, Glenn began his journey into Nevada. After Glenn left Nevada, Glenn drove through Arizona and for a few miles shortly before entering Utah, which was where he had spent most of his journey. Glenn was currently driving past the "Welcome to Colourful Colorado" sign and was heading towards the town of Fruita, which was only about 20 more minutes away. Once he reached Fruita, he would drive in, cause more trouble, and get some breakfast. Glenn looked around Colorado with a smile on his face. It was a warm, sunny day, and Glenn Rogers rode along the highway with a good feeling inside him. But he wasn't yet satisfied. He wanted more. Blowing up a gas station wasn't enough. He wanted to blow up more and kill more people. It was partly because he was crazy and partly because the devil forced him to do it through mind control. The devil had made him 10 times crazier than he already was. Glenn couldn't wait to get to Sideville. He just couldn't wait. But first he would arrive at Fruita and blow some stuff up there. He didn't know what he was going to blow up yet, but he was definitely going to blow something up. And people are going to die. Eventually, Glenn Rogers came off Route 70. At the junction, turned left onto the Highway 30 and entered the town of Fruita. As soon as he entered Fruita, Glenn could already see the sight of a Burger King just off to his right. He had already found exactly what he had come for. Some breakfast, a nice building to burn, and some goddamn people to kill. Glenn Rogers smiled and began laughing hysterically, and didn't stop laughing until he had parked up, grabbed his weapons, left the car, and entered the Burger King. He approached the till. "Hello," he said as the cashier approached them. The cashier was a pretty young girl who looked around 25 years of age, had dark brown hair and wore the usual Burger King uniform. "Hi," she replied. "Would you like to order?" "I want you," he replied. Excuse me?" she asked, slightly worried. "You heard me," Glenn replied by putting his revolver out of his pocket and pointed it at the cashier. "Get in the back of my truck." She screamed and ducked behind the counter, and at the same time, so did everyone else in the building. Glenn turned around. "If anyone moves a muscle, I'm going to shoot you," he shouted. "And don't you dare even think of calling the cops." Suddenly, someone got up from beneath one of the tables and charged for the door. Within seconds, Glenn shot them dead. "That's exactly what's going to happen to you if you try running out," Glenn shouted again. He turned back to the till. "Someone get me some breakfast." No reply. Glenn repeated himself. "I said, someone get me some goddamn breakfast." Eventually, a young man who had a wet patch around his crutch appeared from somewhere behind the counter. What would you like, sir?" Glenn gripped his gun tighter, pointed at the young man and shouted, "Talk properly, you frickin' retard!"
"Sorry, what would you like, sir?"
Can I have some double bacon? Breakfast king?"
Yes, sir."
Glenn Rogers walked over to a table that no one was hiding under and sat down. A few seconds later, he could hear distant police car sirens.
"Who the hell called the goddamn police?"
Glenn shouted. "You're all going to regret this. And if any of you try running out, then you're not going to make it." Glenn ran towards the Burger King exit and ran out. He ran towards his pickup truck, pulled out the can of gasoline that was sitting on the back seat, and ran back inside. "You see this?" He held up the can of gas for everyone. "This is going to be the death of you." He quickly began pouring it all over the Burger King floor, then pulled out his lighter and showed it to everyone. "Look what I've got!" Glenn smiled. Suddenly, someone else got up and ran for the exit. He almost got out, but luckily for Glenn, he just got his revolver out in time and fired 3 bullets at the person who was trying to escape, and all 3 hit them. "Anyone got a cigarette? I've never smoked before, but I want to try blowing this place up with a cigarette. You know, just to change things up a bit." No one replied. "Fine, have a boring death." Glenn lit his lighter, ran over to the door, and threw the lighter across the building and ran away, watching the explosions. The police sirens were a lot louder now, and he didn't have much time. He quickly got into his pickup and drove away, laughing hysterically. He drove straight back onto Route 70 and continued his journey to Sideville, with no police cars in sight. He couldn't wait to get to Sideville. He may have been annoyed because he didn't get any breakfast, but he could stop off at the next town and get some there, and then he would be feeling even better than he was now. Glenn turned on the radio, turned up to max volume, opened his window for a bit of fresh air, and strode down the highway, singing along to his favourite songs at the top of his lungs. "I can't see you, master," he shouted out loud. "I can't wait to see you, and I can't wait to see the town." The sun shone down, and suddenly he knew that everything would go just fine. And for that, he couldn't wait. Chapter 25. By 9 p.m, Glenn Rogers was far away from Futa and was now travelling past Palisade, Colorado. And at the same time, Jared Hall woke up back in his bed and his own house. He woke up next to Caleb Hatch and was relieved to see Caleb was also awake and not dead like Rowan Stenhouse. "I still can't believe Rowan's dead," Caleb said, half to himself and half to Jared. Jared said nothing for a while, and they both sat silently thinking to themselves. Eventually Jared spoke. "I'm going to see what food there is downstairs and maybe get some breakfast." "I'll come down in a minute," Caleb replied, sounding depressed. Jared left the room and went downstairs. But first he had to step over his father's dead body, and then he could get downstairs. Jared was a little bit sad about his father dying, and his mother too, who was also dead. Her body lay in his parents' bedroom, but he had more important stuff to worry about, like the devil trying to kill everyone in Sideville, including himself, for instance. That was the problem with Caleb. He worries too much about the little things and doesn't see the bigger picture. Sure, your friends dying is bad, but that's nothing to worry about compared to the devil trying to kill not just more of your friends, but the entire village. And it was winning. It had made the entire population of Sideville go from 4,000 to literally 10 in one night. And that statistic also includes the devil itself. And all the other weird ghost things, whatever they are, like, for example, Chester Woodward, whatever the hell he really is. And with all that, Caleb cares about one stupid, idiotic friend by the name of Rowan Stenhouse. Jared opened the cupboard door where all the cereal would usually be, but all there was one packet of Honey Nut Cheerios, which was half empty. He made himself a small bowl of cereal, went over to the table, sat down and began to eat. Meanwhile, back in Jared's bedroom, Caleb Hatch had fallen back asleep and was having a nightmare. It was a nightmare about the devil's new assistant and new friend. His name was Glenn Rogers, and he would be ranked higher than Chester Woodward when he got to Sideville. Glenn Rogers would be ranked equal to the devil, so the devil would no longer be the leader. Glenn and the devil would both be the leaders, and they would both be the leaders of all evil, and would only bring more people to Sideville. They would bring more evil people to Sideville to help on the final battle between good and evil, the final battle between God and the devil, and evil would win, is what Glenn told Caleb in his dream, and that soon good would be outnumbered, and very soon the devil would rule not just Sideville, but the world. And that was when Caleb awoke from the nightmare and screamed. It took a little while for Caleb to pull himself together and to realise that he was safe and that Glenn Rogers was still over 350 miles away. Caleb slowly got up, left the room and began to make his way downstairs. He stepped over the dead body of Jared's father and began descending the stairs. He could hear something behind him. He quickly jumped around and looked at the dead body. It couldn't have moved, he told himself, but he could have sworn it had. He heard it. He stared at the body for a while until suddenly its eyes opened. Caleb jumped back suddenly and fell down the stairs, hit the back of his head on the cold floor and passed out. Where the hell is Caleb? Jared thought to himself as he finished his small bowl of Honey Nut Cheerios. About 20 minutes now had passed since Jared had gone downstairs. I bet he's still thinking about Rowan. He needs to start worrying about the bigger problems. Jared began walking back to his bedroom, but as soon as he neared the bottom of the staircase, Jared noticed Caleb's body. It looked like it could have been dead. Jared ran up to Caleb and shouted at him to wake up. And that was when Tommy Rogers arrived. "Jared Hall?" Tommy called from behind him. Jared turned round. Who the hell are you?" he asked. "My name is Tommy Rogers," he replied, "and I'm here to help." Jared looked at Tommy for a while and saw that he was good. He didn't know what it was about the man, but something about him gave Jared a good feeling. Jared stepped aside and allowed Tommy to approach Caleb. Tommy Rogers leaned over Caleb, muttered a few words under his breath, and Caleb Hatch awoke. The first thing Caleb was asked was, "Who are you?" And Tommy replied, "I'm God's new assistant and new friend, and I'm here to help." And with that, Tommy Rogers disappeared into thin air. Caleb looked around and saw Jared. "Who the hell was that?" he asked Jared. "I have no idea, but there's something about him. I think he's here to help, Caleb. Anyway, what the hell happened to you?" Caleb took a few moments to think until replying, "I think I hallucinated your father waking up and it caused me to jump back. And then I slipped and then everything went black. Caleb, because everything's happened tonight and this morning, I would not be surprised if that wasn't a hallucination. So just be careful when you next go upstairs." There was silence for a moment until Caleb asked, "So what do we do now?" "Well, we find the others, I guess," Jared replied. "You're right. In fact, before I fell down the stairs, I had a dream. It was about someone called, I can't remember, but he was travelling up from Las Vegas to help the devil, and he wasn't good. He was the evilest you could get, eviler than the devil. And I think the devil is trying to form an army of evil, and an army of evil to defeat good. A final battle between good and evil, between God and the devil. So in that case, I think we'd better be forming an army of good." Jared stared at Caleb, shocked. "Caleb, is all that true?" "Yeah, why?" Caleb replied, a little scared. "Then what I said is definitely the right thing to do. Caleb, we need to find others. Not just the people we know, like Eugene and Axel, but maybe others, good people in Sideville that are still alive. So what do we do right now?" "We get ready, we go, and then we form an army of good." "Jared," Caleb asked, "this has gone a long way from just a spooky little barn house." "It sure has." Chapter 26. After eating the little breakfast they had, Roderick Branson, Tracy Lindsay and Ray Peck were sitting in the living room together trying to figure out what was going on and what they were going to do about it, when suddenly they heard shouts coming from outside. "Shh!" Roderick hushed. They all fell silent. "It's probably just nothing," Ray tried to tell him, but Roderick and Tracy both shushed him. They listened for a while, and just before Ray was about to tell them that they were just hearing things, they heard shouting again. Roderick rushed over to the curtains and peeked through. What Roderick saw coming down the road, he couldn't believe. It was 2 teenage boys that looked around the age of 14 to 15. Roderick turned around, faced Tracy and Ray, and shouted quietly, "There are 2 kids outside. They seem like they're searching for other survivors." Ray Peck stayed sat where he was, not saying anything, but just listening to Roderick and Tracy getting excited. Quickly, after explaining to Tracy everything that he saw, they both rushed outside, not even noticing that Ray Peck wasn't interested. Roderick unlocked the front door and ran out. The 2 teenage boys stopped suddenly, turned their heads and faced Roderick and Tracy, who was walking towards them. "Stop there," the kid on the right asked. "Who are you?" Roderick responded, "My name's Roderick Branson, and this is my girlfriend, Tracy Lindsay." The 2 boys faced each other and muttered something before turning back to Roderick and replying, "Do you mind if we come in?" "Yeah, sure," Roderick replied, and they entered the house. When they entered, they noticed Ray Peck sitting in the corner of the room on the sofa. "Ray, is everything all right?" Roderick asked. "Yeah, everything's fine," he replied. Roderick Branson, Tracy Lindsay, Jared Hall and Caleb Hatch took a seat, and they all explained everything they knew about what was going on. They all explained everything about Rowan dying, about the dreams of Glenn Rogers, and about the mysterious ghost that identified himself as Tommy Rogers. They figured that Glenn and Tommy must have been brothers, and that Glenn was working for the devil, whereas Tommy was working for God. They didn't know anything about Glenn and Tommy, but they knew Glenn was evil and Tommy was good. They still didn't know much, but they knew more than they did when they were on their own. The only thing Roderick, Tracy and Ray didn't explain was how Ray had tried to kill Roderick. "So what do we do about all this?" Roderick asked. "Well, we look for more survivors, good survivors," Jared replied. Suddenly Ray Peck jumped up from his seat and looked down at Jared. "Look, kid, why do you think you should boss us all around? You're just a stupid little kid." Jared looked up and faced Ray. "What's your problem? All I've seen you do is sit in the corner and help us in no way at all." All of a sudden Ray Peck did something that shocked everyone, and it happened so fast that if anyone blinked they would have missed it. Ray Peck grabbed Jared Hall around the neck, lifted him, threw him across the room with demonic strength and ran out of the front door. Roderick tried chasing after him, but after taking one step outside, Ray Peck was already nowhere to be seen. Roderick quickly ran back inside and saw Caleb and Tracy crouched over Jared Hall. "Jesus Christ," Roderick shouted. "Is the kid okay?" "I think so," Tracy replied. "I'm all right," Jared told him as he got up. "Did you manage to catch him, Roderick?" "Didn't even see where he went," Roderick replied. "He was too quick." "You sure you're okay?" "Yeah, I'm fine. I knew we shouldn't have trusted that guy. Something seemed off about him from the second I saw him." "Let's go back to where we're trying to think what we're going to do about all this," Caleb suggested, and they all agreed. "So what do you think? The devil is forming an army of evil, and you think that their 3 members are Chester Woodward, a weird ghost that lived thousands of years ago. One of them is Ray Peck, and the other one is one you've been dreaming about called Glenn Rogers. And he's the devil's #1 helper," Roderick asked. "I don't think. I know," Jared replied. "And if we don't do something quick, then we're going to not win this battle." "So what are we going to do?" Roderick asked. "We're going to form our own army," Jared told him. "An army of good. And I know exactly where some more good people are. But they're in the devil's home. They're in the devil's cave." Chapter 27. "Where are you, Master?" Ray Peck called out in his head. "Close your eyes, and I'll show you the way," the devil replied. "Thank you, master. I will always follow you." Ray Peck followed the path that the devil showed him. It led to the barn house. He entered the barn house and finally joined the army of evil. When Ray entered the barn house, he met the devil and Chester Woodward. He welcomed Ray and showed him the way to their secret base. It was underneath the barn house and only accessible by a hidden staircase. "After you," the devil told him, and he went down with the devil and Chester following behind him. They went down, and the devil explained everything to Ray. The devil kept going on about someone called Glenn Rogers, who would be due to arrive in Sideville later today between 1500 and 1600. The devil was excited about Glenn Rogers, and so was Chester Woodward, and at last Ray Peck felt he was where he belonged, doing what he was born to do, and if Ray couldn't wait for the arrival of Glenn Rogers, he felt as if he, the devil, Chester and Glenn were already together and had already won the battle. Ray felt at home, and as soon as Glenn Rogers arrived, the devil promised that the party would get started straight away. Ray told the devil everything about the good people he knew, but the devil said it was okay because he still didn't know much. And that was how Ray Peck met the gang of evil. Chapter 28. The time was 9:30 a.m. when Axel, Andrew and Eugene finally saw the light. It was the light of the cave exit, and they could see that it was finally daytime. They'd been walking around endless tunnels for 3.5 hours now, Andrew limping, and at last they had finally found the cave's exit. "Look, Eugene, it's the exit," Axel told Eugene excitedly, and they all looked. "Let's hurry up and get out of here then," Andrew replied. "I don't think I can make it much longer." "You're going to be fine, Andrew," Axel told him. "Just stick with us." They carried on walking for what felt like many more hours, but in reality it was only a couple of minutes, until suddenly they found them. They saw 4 figures at the end of the tunnel. "Axel? Andrew? Do you see that?" Eugene asked. "There are people," Axel exclaimed. "Do you think they're friendly?" Eugene asked. "I hope so." As soon as they neared closer, they could make out who they were. The 2 people were Jared Hall and Caleb Hatch. "It's Jared and Caleb," Axel shouted. And as Axel said this, the group of 4 noticed them, and Jared and Caleb began running towards them. In no time at all, Jared and Caleb reached Axel and Eugene. "Caleb, Jared, I can't believe it's you," Axel said. Andrew didn't say anything, but just smiled at them. Andrew was too injured to talk. "Where's Rowan?" Axel asked. Jared and Caleb looked at each other before saying, "We found him in the barn house and, Was he dead?" "No, but he was dying," Jared replied. "There was nothing we could do. His goddamn bone was sticking out of his leg. What could we do?" "It's all right, Jared. As long as no one else has died." The growing group of 5 turned towards Roderick and Tracy and began to walk towards them. "Anyway, who are they?" Axel asked. "His name is Roderick and his girlfriend Tracy. We found them while we were trying to find other survivors, and luckily we found what we were looking for," Jared replied. A few minutes later they were all together and were slowly making their way out of the damn cave. They introduced themselves to each other and decided on going back to Jared's since Ray knew where Roderick's house was, and finally exited the cave. Andrew turned around, faced it, pointed his middle finger up at the damn cave, and then turned back around and carried on. Eventually, at 10 a.m, the group of 7 arrived back at Jared's house and rested for about 20 minutes. "So, what are we going to do about all this?" Roderick Branson asked. There was silence for a moment until Eugene replied, "We unleash the power of God and compel the evil to hell." "You make it sound like it's easy to do," Axel said. "What else are we going to do, Axel? To me, it sounds like an okay idea," Roderick replied. "But how are we going to do that?" "I don't know," Eugene thought for a few seconds. "What about that Tommy Rogers guy? He might be able to help." I've got a good idea, dear, Jared began. How about instead of sending them to hell, we bring hell to them? What are you talking about? Andrew asked. How the hell are we going to do that? Roderick asked. It sounds stupid, I know, Jared trailed off. Oh, I don't know. Go on, Jared, Eugene asked. I don't think it's stupid. You have a good idea there. Jared looked around. No one was laughing like back in the old days, like when Rowan, Andrew and Caleb laughed at him when they said that the devil lives in the barn house when they were on the bus. It wasn't like that anymore. They trusted him. In fact, Rowan, if Rowan was still around, even he would probably trust Jared, because Jared Hall was in charge now. Well, maybe, if Chester managed to open a portal to hell all of them years ago and summon the devil, maybe we could reactivate the portal, and maybe, just maybe, hell could drag the devil, Chester and Ray, and all the other evil, whatever they are, straight to hell, and maybe it could drag Sideville in with it too. Well, that's a lot better than my idea, Eugene replied. And maybe we could use Tommy to help us reactivate it, Axel said. See, Jared, Eugene told him, because of you, we're getting a serious plan together. Jared, you're a genius. So, Axel began, let's get the plan straight. Axel went into the other room, got some paper, came back into the living room and sat back down. Anyone got a pen? Caleb pulled a pen out of his pocket and passed it to Axel. So how are we going to get Tommy Rogers to do this? Can he even do this? Axel asked. Sure he can, Jared replied. He's friends with God. You're saying we just call him and you think he'll come? I know he'll come, Axel, because good always beats evil. I trust you, Jared, Axel told him. So first, we go to the cave, right? No way am I going back there, Andrew butted in. I think we should leave Andrew here anyway, Axel began. He can't walk properly. He's way too injured. A few of us can stay back here, Jared began, and make sure this place stays in good shape, in case any of us have to retreat back during the battle. Plus, someone will have to look after Andrew anyway. So who's going to come to the cave, and who's going to stay here, Axel asked. I think we should take me, Eugene, Axel, Caleb, Roderick, and maybe you, Tracy, could stay back after the house and look after Andrew. Everyone agreed, even Caleb. Caleb actually wanted to go to the cave. He wasn't a scared little boy anymore. He'd seen enough, and now he wanted to go on, more than anyone. He wanted to kill the goddamn devil and send it back down to the deepest pits of hell. The devil had already killed his parents, best friend, and pretty much the entire village. And now it was Caleb's time for payback. So, Axel began, me, Jared, Caleb and Eugene are going to go to the cave, right? Yes, Jared replied. So, we're going to get there and try and find a portal to hell? Axel looked at Jared and Jared nodded. Then once we get there, we're going to call for Tommy Rogers, and he's going to magically appear out of thin air, and you're sure that this will work, right? I'm sure, Jared replied, without any doubts on his face. And then we're going to tell him to reactivate the portal. And he will. Yes, Jared replied. Then we're going to run out of the cave as fast as we can and leave as soon as we find the exit. Yeah, that's right. And then all the evil in this village is going to get sucked in. Everything and everyone will be sucked in. So that's why we've got to get out of Sideville as quickly as possible. So, when are we going to do this? Axel asked. Tonight, Jared replied. Tonight, Axel exclaimed. Why tonight? Because by tonight, Glenn would have arrived. And I want to send Glenn to hell more than anyone. I've never met him, but based on the dream that Caleb had about him, he seems like an evil guy. I just want to be doubly sure that this is the best thing to do. I mean, why can't we just leave Sideville right now and never come back? Because then you're giving the village of Sideville straight to the devil. And then he and his army will become more powerful. And they won't just take over more land, such as the entire state of Nebraska, but eventually they'll take over the whole of the US, and then the entire world. I trust you, Jared, and so does everyone else in this room, but I just want to make sure it's definitely the best thing to do, Axel replied. It is, Axel. It definitely is, Jared told him, because with the power of God, no one can stop us. Like I said, good always beats evil, and God will always beat the devil. Chapter 29. It was 1300, and Glenn Rogers entered Denver, Colorado, leaving the Rockies behind him. Glenn had been driving for almost 12 hours now, and he only had about 3 hours to go until he would finally reach the small village of Sideville, located in southeastern Nebraska. A big city like this will probably have an airport in it, Glenn thought. A smile formed on his face as the previous thought developed into another. Maybe I could blow up the entire airport. And suddenly his thought was followed by the voice. "I'll show you the way, Glenn," it said. Master, is that you?" Glenn asked in the voice. "I'll show you the way to Denver International Airport, Glenn. But then you must promise not to make any more stops after that." "I promise, Master. Master, for you, I'll do anything." And that was when the voice faded, and all of a sudden Glenn knew the way. He knew the way to Sideville, but more importantly, he knew the way to the airport, and Glenn was going to have some fun there. By 1:30 p.m, Glenn had arrived at the airport. He signalled into the middle lane for departures and parked outside the building. Glenn turned around to face the back seat of his pickup to get the gasoline, but as he did so, he found a middle-aged man sitting in the back seat. "Jesus Christ!" Glenn shouted. "Who the goddamn bloody hell are you? For Christ's sake!" "My name is Gary Hobson," the man began. "I know exactly why you're here, and I'm telling you to drive away right now, or I'm going to blow your frickin' head off." Gary took out a Mossberg 500 shotgun from beneath his seat and pointed it directly at Glenn Rogers' head. "I come from Grand Junction, Colorado, and I saw what you did to that Burger King, so I followed you. And when I saw you travelling to the airport, I knew exactly what you were up to." "What's your problem?" Glenn asked the man. "It's a problem to me because I want to stop wasting time and hurry up, get into Sideville," Gary replied. Glenn stared at him, confused, until asking him, "How do you know I'm heading to Sideville?" "Because I'm heading there as well. The devil wants me too, Glenn." "Why does he want you?" Glenn asked. "I'm as evil as him." "No, you're not. You're stopping me from killing people." "I'm a psycho, Glenn, because I believe in evil. But I want to hurry up and meet the devil so we can kill people. And eventually we can take over the entire freaking world. So, can we go?" "All right, Gary. 3 hours left. Let's frickin' go." Glenn drove away and began the final stretch to Sideville. "Sideville!" Glenn shouted. "Here we frickin' come!" Chapter 30. Back in Sideville, the good and evil were preparing for the arrival of Glenn Rogers. At 1400, Jared had a dream. He was tired from everything that happened the previous night, and as soon as he lay down after eating a little lunch that he and his group could find, he fell asleep. The dream began in a small village called Hudson in Colorado. He was in a house, and someone was trying to break down the door. Jared Hall was scared. He peeked through one of the blinds of the small bedroom that he was in and saw 2 big scary men outside, and one of them was holding a can of gasoline. The one holding the can of gasoline was Glenn Rogers. How did he know? He'd never met Glenn Rogers before, not even in a dream, but somehow Jared knew that it was Glenn Rogers. The other man, however, was a stranger. He didn't know who the other man was, but he was carrying a big shotgun firmly in his right hand, and he didn't look like a man who would hesitate to use it, and that scared Jared. What was scarier was that he had no idea he was dreaming. It was so vivid and so real that the possibility of it being a dream didn't even pass through Jared's mind. Suddenly, there was a loud crash as the door fell off its hinges and the men stepped in. Jared didn't know what to do. The stairs led straight to the front door, so if he tried running down the stairs, he'd be running straight into the 2 men. and if he tried to fight, he would lose. He was a 15-year-old child. And they were two crazy middle-aged men, one with a can of gasoline, Jared assumed he had a lighter, and the other had a big heavy shotgun. So the only logical thing Jared could think of was to hide from them. First he thought about hiding in the closet. Then he thought that would be stupid because that's where everyone hides. The closet would be the first place they would check. Where else could he hide though? Suddenly he tried to think. He heard the men coming up the stairs, very loudly. Quickly Jared hid in the only other place he could think of. Under the bed. Probably the second place that they would check, Jared thought, but he didn't have any time to hide somewhere else. It was under the bed, or he might as well just let them kill him. All of a sudden they entered the room. The first thing the men did was open the closet door. "No one here," one of the men said. Jared couldn't tell which one said it, as he could only see the muddy boots trampling around the room. Eventually, just as they were leaving the room, one of the men said, "Oh, we didn't check under the bed." Jared's heart skipped a beat, and one of the men began to approach the bed. It was the other man that crouched down, not Glenn Rogers. And when the man saw Jared, his eyes widened, and he shouted, "Glenn! I found him!" Glenn rushed over, crouched down, grabbed Jared and pulled him out. Jared shouted at Glenn, but he ignored him. Glenn stared at Jared for a few seconds before saying, "This is my friend Gary Hobson, and he's about to blow your frickin' head off." Jared began to cry as Glenn held him tightly, not allowing him to move, and made him face Gary, who was carrying the shotgun. Gary lifted the shotgun to Jared's head before suddenly Glenn shouted, "Do it!" Suddenly Jared heard a loud bang of the shotgun, and that was when he woke up from the nightmare and almost fainted straight away after waking up, but he managed to somehow calm down. Jared realised he must have screamed because he heard Eugene King rushing up the stairs. Eugene entered the room, looking concerned, and rushed towards Jared. "Are you all right?" Eugene asked. "You screamed." I had a bad nightmare, Eugene." "What happened?" "Well," Jared paused. "You know what? Let's gather around the living room. I think this is important. I need to tell everyone together." "All right, Jared. Just take your time. There's no need to rush. I'll get everyone together. You just come downstairs when you're ready." "Cheers, Eugene," Jared replied. Eugene left and assembled everyone in the living room. Eventually Jared came down and told everyone the big news. He told them that Glenn was close, and he wasn't coming alone. He had a partner, and his partner name was Gary Hobson. Glenn would carry around a lighter and a can of gasoline, while Gary would carry a big, heavy shotgun. Meanwhile, Glenn and Gary were slowly getting closer and closer to Sideville, and everyone was slowly getting closer and closer to doomsday. Would this be how the world would end? Or would this be how the devil would die? Part 4. The Final Battle. Chapter 31. They all knew the dreaded time would eventually come, and as each second passed, the closer the dreaded time came. And finally, at 16:14, Glenn Rogers and Gary Hobson arrived in Sideville. Glenn had travelled through 5 states, picking up Gary in the 4th, until eventually, after no more than 15 long hours, they entered Nebraska and drove towards the village of Sideville, which was located southeast Nebraska, near the border to Colorado. "We're here, Glenn! We're finally frickin' here!" Gary shouted at him. Glenn looked around and couldn't believe his eyes. He was here in the village of Sideville. After almost 16 hours of constantly dreaming of this place, he was finally here. And as they drove deeper into Sideville, a large smile formed on Glenn Rogers' face. "My master, where are you?" he called. And his master replied, "I am in the barn house, Glenn. In the barn house. Come in and find me. Find me, Glenn, find me. And bring your friend, Gary, in with you too. He's in the barn house, Glenn told Gary. We must find the barn house. Well, where the frick is that? Gary shouted. And as soon as Gary asked, they could suddenly see the barn house in the distance. It was as if the devil had moved the barn house closer to them, so they could find it easily. They both stared at it when Glenn answered Gary. I think we've already found it, Gary. And that was when Glenn began to feel excited, building up inside him. He was here. The devil was so close. Glenn sped up, and within no time they had parked up outside the barn house and were about to go in. Step on in, Glenn. Meet me and my gang. Suddenly excitement took over Glenn. Glenn Rogers jumped out of the Ford pickup and ran towards the front door, with Gary Hobson following behind him. This was it. This was why he was born. To find Satan and take over the world with him. And now it was on the other side of this door. The devil, Satan, Lucifer, the boogeyman, the king of the underworld, whoever he really was. He was on the other side of this door, and Glenn Rogers just couldn't wait to finally meet him. And all of a sudden the doors flung open, and standing before Glenn Rogers and Gary Hobson was the gang of all evil, the gang of all sins, the gang of the underworld were now standing before Glenn and Gary. Welcome, a voice said, and Glenn and Gary followed them inside. They showed them downstairs in the basement, introduced themselves and explained everything they had planned. The final group of evil had now been assembled. The devil and Glenn Rogers were in charge. They were both as evil as each other, and they were both pure evil. They were the most powerful by far, and everything that happened they would be responsible for. Second in charge was Chester Woodward. He was the evilest, most powerful devil worshipper. And when he was alive, he even summoned the devil into the world. Everything that the devil and Glenn weren't responsible for, he was. Chester was the first one that the devil found, and was now the first member to join the group. And if it weren't for Chester, none of this would be possible. Finally, Gary Hobson and Ray Peck made up the rest of the pack. They would be on the front line. When any battles happened, they would be the ones to kill, unless Glenn had already killed everyone. And altogether, the devil, Glenn Rogers, Chester Woodward, Gary Hobson and Ray Peck made up the most powerful gang ever. Meanwhile, 40 minutes later, Jared Hall was waking up from another nightmare, and this time when he awoke, he knew that he had screamed. And just like deja vu, Eugene King came running up the stairs, shouting Jared's name. It's all right, Eugene, Jared shouted at Eugene, who came into his room. It's just another nightmare. Well, what happened? Eugene asked. Is it bad? Jared tried to think back to what happened, and as soon as he did, he started feeling scared. Yeah, it's very bad, Eugene. Well, what happened? Jared looked at Eugene in the eye, looking very worried, and replied, It's Glenn Rogers. He's arrived in Sideville. Should I let the others know? Eugene asked. Yeah, quickly. We've got to get to that cave as fast as possible. Eugene sprinted out of the room and down the stairs to tell the others. Meanwhile, Jared stood up and got ready. This was it. He knew this time would come, ever since that night when loads of kids in the village disappeared. And now it was happening. The final battle between good and evil was upon them all. And it was just getting started. The gang of evil and the group of good were both ready. Was Jared right? Does good always win? Or was the evilness of Satan and Glenn too much? All was soon to be revealed. The time struck 5 p.m. Chapter 32. The first problem came when they reached the cave. It was gone. The entrance to the cave was now just an empty cliff face, whereas there should have been a cave entrance. "Well, there's our first problem," Axel said. They walked closer to the cliff face, but it didn't matter how close they went. There was still no cave entrance there. "What do we do now?" Caleb asked. "Well, we've got to go to the barn house, I guess," Eugene suggested before Jared butted in. "No, that's what the devil wants us to do. The devil knew we would go to the cave first, so he blocked it. And then he knew we would go to the barn house next. And if we did that, we'd be surrounded by 5 of the evilest people. In fact, no, not people, things in the world. And then we would be screwed. Instead, we need to think of a better solution." "You're right," Eugene replied. "But the thing is, what are we going to do?" They fell silent for a moment. "Maybe we could call for Tommy Rogers," Axel suggested, "if he'll actually come." "Well, I guess we could try," Eugene replied. Eugene, Jared, Axel and Caleb gathered around in a circle. "So, how do we do this?" Caleb asked. Eugene ignored him and looked up. He wasn't focusing on the sky, though. He was focusing on what was beyond it. God. And he began to speak. "Please, Father, bring us the good man, the man who is the brother with evil, but knows how to stop evil, and who will stop evil when he most needs to." Eugene paused for a moment before finishing. "I beg you, Father, bring us the man who comes by the name of Tommy Rogers." Suddenly silence. The group stared up at the sky, waiting for something to happen, but for a long while nothing did. Caleb even almost said something when suddenly the sky replied. Not in the way they were hoping, but it replied. Lightning struck down, hit the top of where the cave entrance would be, and sent everyone flying. However, when they got up from the ground to look, the cave entrance had reappeared. Eugene looked up at the sky. "Thank you, Father." And to Eugene, it's almost like the sky had smiled back at him. Eugene looked around for the others. They gathered again and began to walk towards the cave entrance. "What happened?" Caleb asked. "I think we had a bit of help from God," Eugene answered Caleb. "He always shows up when we most need him," Jared replied. And they carried on approaching the cave entrance. Once again, they were back in the bloody cave. At the house, Andrew was getting worse. He was lying in the upstairs bedroom, in bed. Roderick and Tracy were with him, trying to find the best thing to do. "We've got to get Andrew out of Sideville and find a hospital, Roderick." "What are we still doing here with this poor kid lying in bed beside us, slowly getting closer and closer to death?" Tracy asked. "Tracy, we can't just leave Sideville and expect to find a random hospital placed conveniently on the side of the highway," Roderick replied, sounding stressed out. "We're in the bloody USA. You could be walking down a highway for days before you might even find a village, let alone a bloody hospital." "Well, I don't know, Roderick. What do you think we should do?" There was silence for a few moments before Tracy did something that shocked Roderick. She looked at Roderick, fed up, and stormed out of the room. Roderick followed her and repeated, "Tracy, where are you going?" But she just ignored him and walked off. She went to the front door, put her jacket on, turned to face Roderick, and that was when she finally answered him. "I'm leaving, Roderick." "Well, what about the devil and Glenn and everything else that we've got to do?" Roderick asked, confused and frustrated at the same time. Tracy said nothing, but just stared at Roderick. "Where on earth are you going to go?" Roderick asked, but again Tracy ignored him, and this time she opened the front door and left. Roderick stood there, confused and angry, not knowing what to make next, what move to make next, and then decided to head back to Andrew and make sure he was doing okay. However, when he went back to see Andrew, he had some bad news. It was another nightmare, and it was about Tracy Lindsay. Chapter 33. "What's the situation, Master?" A voice came from behind the devil. The devil turned round and saw Ray Peck approaching him. "That bloody group of idiots got into the bloody cave," the devil began in an annoyed tone. "Which means it's you and Gary's job to stop them, and you better not let me down, or I'll get Glenn to take care of you. Is that understood?" "You can count on me, Master," Ray replied. "How'd they get in anyway? I thought you and Glenn took care of it." "We did, but somehow they got some help from bloody God or something." "Was it Tommy Rogers?" "I don't know, but something or someone helped them get into that cave, and we need to stop them. And when I say we, I mean you and Gary." "We'll be right on it, Master. Not a major problem. We'll take care of them straight away, and we'll bring them straight back here for you and Glenn to take care of." "Cheers, Ray. I know you won't let me down. Oh, and by the way, we've got some new one to join us." "Oh, really?" Ray asked, surprised and a little bit excited. "Who?" "Come closer," the devil told Ray. "I'll tell you." And after they finished talking, Ray Peck gave the devil a final reassuring look, turned and left to go, and informed Gary Hobson about their first mission. Ray told Gary what they were going to do, and then they would bring them back to the barn house for the devil and Glenn Rogers to take care of them. And that meant torture, death, and hell. Chapter 34. The next problem came when the group were about 15 minutes into the cave. Not too far in the distance, they could see them. It was Ray Peck and Gary Hobson. Jared was the first to notice them, and as soon as he pointed them out, everyone else noticed them too. Jared was also the first to see the portal right behind them. "Eugene, look!" Jared shouted. "The portal's right behind them!" And then everyone else saw it. But the group had two things in their way, Ray Peck and Gary Hobson. "How are we going to get past them?" Jared asked the group, but no one could find an answer. As the two figures were getting dangerously nearer, Jared summoned up an idea. "Maybe we could call for Tommy Rogers." "Well, how the hell are we going to do that?" Axel asked, scared. "He should just come anyway," Eugene said. "He usually comes when we most need him. And I feel we need him the most now." "We've got to get out of here," Caleb shouted. "Look how close they're getting." "No, Tommy Rogers will arrive soon," Eugene shouted back. "He's not going to arrive, Eugene," Caleb shouted, but the others ignored him. And just like the old Caleb Hatch, he ran off. Caleb ran out of the cave, leaving the group behind. He didn't stop running until he was out of the cave, and even then, after taking a breath, he ran further out of the woods and into the village. Back at the house, Andrew was still getting worse, and now, lying on the bed with Andrew was Roderick Branson. Roderick was crying while Andrew was dying. Roderick sat up behind because he thought he heard someone outside. His first thought was, maybe it's Tracy. But when he peeked through the curtain, he could see it was. It was Caleb Hatch, and he was running towards the house, looking very scared. This could only be bad, Roderick thought, but then again, I don't think this situation could get any worse. Suddenly the front door bolted open, and scared little Caleb came running in. "Roderick! Andrew! Tracy!" Caleb shouted. "I'm up here," Roderick replied, with no hope in his voice at all. Caleb came upstairs and bolted into the room where Roderick and Andrew were. Caleb was about to tell Roderick everything that had happened when he stopped himself and asked, "What happened?" Roderick got off his bed and replied, "Tracy's gone, and Andrew is almost dead." "Where did Tracy go?" "I've no idea. She just walked off downstairs and left." "Did you not try and stop her?" "It's no point, Caleb. I don't care anymore." Caleb turned his head to face Andrew. "Is Andrew going to be all right?" "I doubt it, Caleb. He's getting worse every second that passes." Caleb said nothing, sat down on the bed next to Andrew. A few minutes passed when Caleb asked, "What are we going to do, Roderick?" But Roderick had no response. Suddenly the front door bolted open again, and heavy footsteps pounded up the stairs, and Jared Hall charged into the room. Jared looked at Caleb, and shouted at him. "You left us there! You left us there! You bloody coward!" Jared ran towards Caleb and grabbed him by the lapels. They took Eugene and Axel. "We must hurry up and find them, Caleb. Otherwise, they're going to get killed." Roderick stood in the corner of the room, not saying anything. "We should hurry up and go then," Caleb said. Jared walked up to Roderick. "Are you going to come?" "I don't think I should, Jared." "Let me rephrase that. You're coming," Jared shouted at him. "And where's Tracy?" "She left." "What do you mean she left?" "I mean, she went to the front door and left." "Why?" "I don't know." "Can we hurry up and find your friends?" "All right, let's go," Jared said as he left the room with Roderick and Caleb following him. Jared, Roderick and Caleb left the house as quickly as they could and began to make their way towards the only logical place they could think of finding Eugene and Axel. The barn house. They would go to the barn house, and the barn house would be where they would have their final battle between good and evil. Chapter 35. At 18:15, someone else arrived at the barn house to join evil. Their name was Tracy Lindsay. She knocked on the barn house door, and Glenn Rogers answered it. "Welcome," Glenn said, and let her in. "You made the right choice. If you want to live, you have to join us. The others are not going to stand a chance. Fools." But no matter what Glenn said, there was still a voice in the back of Tracy's mind telling her that this was the wrong thing to do. "Where are the others?" Tracy asked. "Well, Ray Peck and Gary Hobson are trying to find the group of survivors. I'm right here, and the Devil and Chester Woodward are downstairs, planning what they will do when the group arrive." "Could we meet them?" Tracy asked, not exactly sure if she did want to meet them. "Certainly. They're right down here," Glenn replied as he approached the staircase. Glenn let Tracy go first and followed her down the stairs. As soon as they reached the bottom of the stairs, Tracy suddenly didn't want to be there anymore. She wanted to go back to the house with Roderick. Even if she had more chance of survival here, she was still helping evil take over the world. Suddenly, the Devil walked up to her. "Hello, Tracy," the Devil said, and stared at her, focusing hard. "You don't want to be here, do you?" I don't know what you're talking about. Why would I be here if I didn't want to be here?" "Because you're scared, aren't you, Tracy? You know that we're going to win, and you came here because you thought you'd be safer." Tracy said nothing and just looked up at the Devil, scared. Suddenly, the Devil shouted, "Kill her!" And as soon as the Devil said this, Glenn Rogers grabbed her from behind, and Chester Woodward came in from the other room to help out Glenn. She screamed and tried to get out, but nothing worked, and what she saw was horrifying. Behind Chester, she could see the Devil. The Devil was grinning, and it was the evilest, most terrifying grin she had ever seen. And suddenly, just before Tracy thought she was about to die, a massive bang came from upstairs, followed by loud shouts. "Hey, where the hell are you?" "Who the frick is that?" Glenn shouted, and suddenly the door leading to the basement bolted open, followed by more shouts. "I know you're down here," the voice shouted again, and down came Jared Hall, looking not one bit scared. The Devil looked at him, and behind Jared, Caleb Hatch, and behind Caleb, Roderick Branson followed. The group of good and the gang of evil stared at each other blankly. "What's going on? What is Tracy doing?" The Devil looked up at Jared, grinned again, and replied, "We're going to kill her, Jared, and you're all going to watch it happen." Jared charged the Devil, but before he got close, everything went black, and that was the first time that Jared thought, maybe evil will win. Chapter 36. At 1700, Tommy Rogers arrived at the barn house. Meanwhile, Jared Hall was waking up. He woke up in a prison cell which Jared guessed was underneath the basement of the barn house. Either side of him were more prison cells, and opposite him were even more. There were 6 cells in total, and in each of them was a different person. In between the ones opposite each other, there was a walkway. At one end of the walkway was a door leading out to the way out, and at the other end was a solid wall. And there were 3 cells on each side of the walkway. The one closest to the wall had Axel Clegg and Roderick Branson. Next to them in the middle were Jared Hall and Eugene King, and the closest to the door were Caleb Hatch and Tracy Lindsay. Jared was the first to wake up, and he tried to wake up Eugene. "Eugene! Eugene, wake up!" Jared shouted. Eventually Eugene woke up, and not long after, everyone else woke up. "Where are we, Jared?" Eugene asked. "I don't know, Eugene, but I think we're under the barn house." "Well, how are we going to get out?" "I don't know, Eugene. For the first time, I think we might not win." They were all silent until suddenly the door opened, and like a miracle, in came Tommy Rogers. Tommy walked up to Jared Hall and spoke to him. Tommy held out his hand and showed the key to him. "Here's the key, Jared. And now go and defeat evil." "I will. For you, Tommy. I will," Jared replied. Tommy Rogers turned around and faced Eugene King. "And Eugene, use the power that God gave you to your advantage. Remember, you're not like a regular person. You were sent from God to help. So prove that he was right to choose you." And as quick as he came, he disappeared. Immediately, Jared put the key into the lock of his cell and freed himself. Jared walked over to Eugene's cell, looked up at him and said, "Let's get the hell out of here." Jared put the key into Eugene's lock and turned it. He continued to do this to everyone else until they were all free, and then the group approached the locked door. "Try the key that Tommy gave you," Eugene suggested. And it worked. Somehow Tommy Rogers had given him a key that somehow unlocked any door. The group advanced through the hallway that the door led into, and eventually it reached a staircase. "I think this leads to the basement." Jared turned to face the group. "I think this is it. I think that this is the final battle." "Well, what are we waiting for?" Eugene shouted. "Let's go and kick their frickin' ass!" And that was just the beginning. Chapter 37. One moment Andrew Keyes was lying in bed. The next moment everything went black. And the next moment he was in the sky. Andrew looked up at God, and God looked back down at Andrew. "Am I dead?" Andrew asked. God smiled at Andrew and replied, "Your body is dead, Andrew, but your soul will live on forever." "So, what happens now?" "Soon I will send you back to Earth with Tommy, and you can help your group of friends defeat the devil." God began. "Oh, I almost forgot. There's someone else I would like you to meet." In the distance, Andrew could see someone who was a similar height as him walking towards them. As they neared them, Andrew could start to see who it was. It was someone he recognised. "Rowan?" Andrew began. "Is that you?" As Rowan Stenhouse approached them, God said, "Sorry, I would like you, Tommy and Rowan, to go back down to Earth and help fight evil. Do you think you could do that?" They nodded, and Tommy approached them. And suddenly, as if nothing ever happened, it was as if they had regenerated. Chapter 38. The group walked up the staircase which led to a trapdoor above them, where they could hear the devil and Glenn Rogers speaking. They listened for a while, and then they heard someone else enter the room. "Chester Woodward," the devil began, turning his glance at Chester, "I have another task for you." Oh, right. What is it?" "In the house that Jared owns, there's a kid there lying down in the bed upstairs, and his name is Andrew Keyes." "So what do you want me to do?" "I would like you to go there and bring that Andrew kid back here. Do you think you could do that?" "Certainly, master." Jared turned to face the group. "What should we do?" The others stared blankly back at Jared until Eugene suggested, "We've got to get in there and stop them before Chester leaves." Jared turned back to the trapdoor and touched the surface of it. "On the count of 3, we'll all run in, all right?" He looked back at the others, and they all nodded and turned back to the trapdoor. 1. Silence. 2. They all suddenly felt nervous. 3. They all bolted through the trapdoor into the room with Satan, Glenn and Chester. However, there was no one there, just an empty dark room with a speaker on a shelf in the corner. The devil spoke through it. "Ha! You thought you could fool me. Now you'll never get out of that room. And if you look at the TV on the wall, that'll turn on when we bring Andrew back, and you can watch us kill him." The group was silent. "What do we do now?" Axel asked, but no one replied. Not because no one wanted to reply, but because no one knew how to reply. About 30 minutes later, the TV turned on. Chapter 39. Andrew Keyes opened his eyes and met the sight of the stony hard concrete, rolled over onto his back and looked up at the sky. The sky was clear, and there wasn't a single cloud for over 100 miles. Wherever he had woken up, it hadn't seemed to have rained there since the dinosaurs ruled it. Andrew got up and looked around. He was in a graveyard, in the middle of many tombstones and crosses. There was a church, and leading up to the church was a stone path. This is where he awoke. Andrew stood on the stony path and looked up at the church that shadowed him from the cloudless sunny day. However, this wasn't any church. This was Sideville Church. But it wasn't called Sideville Church. The word Sideville means the devil, and the church was the only building that didn't allow the devil or things of its kind. The only building in Sideville that remained holy was the church. It was the only building that could stop the devil, and that building was right here, only a few 100 meters away from where the devil currently is. In the barn house. And that was when the idea struck Andrew. That was when he knew how to stop the devil and send evil back where it belonged. How could they have been so stupid and so blind this entire time? Don't bring evil to hell. Bring evil to the church and let the church deal with evil. In simpler words, don't bring evil to evil. Bring evil to good. Or even bring the devil to God. After that, without even bothering to find Tommy and Rowan, Andrew rushed to the barn house to save his friends, save the day and save the world. Chapter 40. After the TV turned on, the group gathered around it and watched. The devil and Glenn Rogers were there. They were staring at them. The group thought they knew what was coming, but they had no idea. Glenn and the devil didn't know what was coming, because when Chester came on the screen and they asked him where Andrew was, Chester replied, He's already dead, master." The devil and Glenn stared at Chester, shocked and confused, and so did Jared and his group. Are you? The devil paused, looking puzzled. Are you sure? He's dead, Master, Chester replied, sounding sure as ever. The group watched on, none of them able to move a muscle. Suddenly something happened that shocked not just the group, but the devil and Glenn, and this time Chester too. Suddenly, just as they were talking about him being dead, the man himself, Andrew Keyes, busted down the stairs into the basement of the barn house. No one that was witnessing this could believe their eyes. The devil was the first to talk. He turned to Chester. You said you were sure he was dead, the devil shouted. I was sure, Chester shouted back. Andrew interrupted. I am dead, but I sent from God to stop you. Suddenly the TV turned off and everyone looked at each other. However, before anyone could say anything, Tommy Rogers appeared. Jared approached him and asked, What's going on? Tommy replied, I'll explain everything in a minute, but for now, if you want to live, then you have to do what I say. Is that understood? I guess, Jared replied, but good. Now everyone needs to gather around me, Tommy demanded. They all did what Tommy told them to do, and suddenly they weren't in the empty dark room anymore. They were in a church. But this wasn't any church. Jared recognised this one. They were in Sideville Church, the only holy place still in the village. And as soon as Jared realised where he was, he instantly figured out the plan. They are going to try and lure the devil here. They're going to try and defeat the devil tonight. And that was what Tommy explained later. Andrew was currently in the barn house trying to distract the devil and his gang so they wouldn't realise the group was gone from the empty room. Andrew couldn't die. He was already dead. Andrew was only alive now to help defeat the devil, and after Andrew's work was done, he would rest in heaven for the rest of eternity. And once again, Jared knew that everything was going to be just fine. After all, good always beats evil. Chapter 41. Rowan Stainhouse was alive again. He awoke on the same hard concrete as Andrew had woken up on earlier. And as he got up, he looked towards the church. He walked up to the church door and knocked on it. Hello? He asked as he waited for someone to answer the door, and to his surprise, someone did answer the door. The door opened, and beyond it stood his friend, Tommy Rogers. He had made friends with Tommy in heaven, and now they were back down on earth together. Welcome, Rowan. Come in. Tommy smiled as he said this, and gestured for Rowan to come into the church. Rowan followed Tommy into the small back room, and inside was a table surrounded by 9 chairs, 7 of them filled with members of the group, and the other 2 seats were left empty for Rowan and Andrew. Rowan was welcomed by everyone and was told to sit down. He sat down, and the meeting began. Where's Andrew? Rowan began by asking. He's in the barn house, Tommy began to answer. He's distracting and his gang, and if it's all going well, they haven't noticed that a lot have escaped. Tommy pointed at the side of the table that Axel, Jared, Caleb, Roderick and Tracy were sitting around as he said this. So what are we going to do? Rowan asked. We're going to wait here. And do what? Rowan replied, confused. Nothing. You see, after the devil and his lot had trapped them down into the dungeon underneath the barn house, they forgot about us, you, me, and Andrew. We listened to what they were planning, and they talked about the church. They said they were going to turn the church into a place to worship the devil. So that's our plan. When they arrive, they won't be expecting us here. They think that Axel, Jared, Caleb, Roderick and Tracy are locked up. They think that you're dead. and the only one they expect to meet is me. And with everyone that they have, they reckon they'd easily defeat me, and they'd be right in thinking that. But they would never beat all of us together, especially not in the church, with God on our side too. I don't want to sound cocky, but I just can't see us losing. So, how long do you think it's going to take? Rowan asked. Who knows, Tommy replied, and as soon as Tommy said that, the main door to the church opened. Don't worry, Tommy said. It's probably just Andrew. After he said this, Tommy left the room and began his way towards the front door. However, before he could even get halfway there, Tommy was met by the sight of Andrew charging and bumping into him. Andrew stopped and looked up at Tommy, while Tommy looked back down at Andrew. Andrew looked terrified. His eyes had popped out, his mouth had dropped open, and his skin was deadly pale. What's wrong? Tommy asked, very concerned. They're coming, Andrew shouted. You have to hurry. They both rushed back to the small back room and told everyone the news. Do they know we're all here? Jared asked. No. They just expect to see Tommy, Andrew replied. And you. No. They sent me into that room that you lot were stuck in. How did you get out? Jared asked. Easy. The same way Tommy got you out. And how actually did he get us out? It seems one minute we were in there and the next minute we appeared in the church. We're not normal people anymore, Jared. We're technically dead. So you're saying you teleported? Jared asked. I guess so, Andrew replied. Suddenly the church front door slammed open and heavy footsteps came pounding in. Crap, Andrew shouted. They're here. I don't think they are, replied Tommy. It sounds like there's only one pair of footsteps. The heavy footsteps pounded slowly around the church floor, shaking the entire building as each step hit the ground. Who do you think it is? Jared asked Tommy. I'm not sure, Tommy replied. It won't be the devil because he's probably sent one of his workers to come here for him. And it probably won't be Glenn because he's just as important as the devil. So who does that leave? Asked Jared. That leaves Chester Woodward, Ray Peck or Gary Hobson. Suddenly, whoever it was shouted. Tommy Rogers, come out now! And that was followed by a loud bang, and it was the sound of a shotgun being fired. And that was followed by more shouts from whoever it was. And suddenly Jared knew who it was. That's Gary, Jared told everyone. What? Tommy replied. How do you know? I had a dream before Glenn and Gary arrived here. I even told everyone about it. And I remember one thing from it. I remember Gary holding a big, heavy shotgun. Suddenly, more shots were fired. What are we going to do? Jared asked Tommy. We're going to go out and kill Gary Hobson before he sees us. So that way he won't be able to report back to the devil what happened. And every time the devil sends someone here, we'll do the same until eventually he'll have to come himself. And that's how we are going to kill the devil. So who's going to go out there? Jared asked. I'll go on my own, Tommy replied. What? It's a good idea, Tommy told Jared. In case the plan doesn't work, he won't know that all of you are here. Seems like a good plan to me, Axel came into the conversation. Eventually, Tommy got up from his seat and began to make his way out of the room and towards the evil Gary Hobson. Chapter 42. Master, master, Chester Woodward shouted as he ran down the basement stairs to the barn house. However, when Chester arrived at the bottom of the stairs, he looked around. He didn't see the devil where he would usually be. That was when Glenn Rogers walked in from another room and answered Chester. What is it? Glenn said. I need to tell the devil something important. I need to report to him that Gary Hobson is dead. He already knows, Glenn replied, sounding calm as if he had never known Gary. That's where he is. He and Ray have gone to the church themselves to stop Tommy Rogers. It's all in our control. The devil even told me to send you straight to the church as soon as I saw you. Well, I don't think it's all in our control either, Glenn. Why is that? It's not just Tommy we're up against here. It's the whole lot of them, Chester exclaimed. What do you mean? Glenn replied, sounding a little less calm than before. What I mean is that the lot we locked up under us is no longer there. They're in the bloody church with all the rest, and Andrew's there. Even the kid, Rowan, who died in the barn house ages ago, has somehow rocked up. Plus, we're up against God himself too. What are we thinking, fighting this lot in a bloody church? I'm telling you, Glenn, we have no chance. Glenn paused for a while, not knowing what to say, until eventually replying. So, what do you think we should do? Tell the devil and Ray Peck to retreat to the barn house? I say we get the bloody hell out of here before it's too goddamn late. Do you exactly want to fight God? Glenn paused for a few moments, not having any clue what the best decision was. Well, I'm getting out of here, Glenn. Chester finally broke the silence and began making his way towards the staircase. Are you coming? Or are you going to stay here with the devil, be killed by your brother, dragged to hell, and live there for eternity? Glenn continued to say nothing. Well, I'm getting in the car and getting out of here. If you want to come, come now. But I don't care. Chester continued walking up the stairs while leaving Glenn with an impossible choice that only had a few seconds to make. And then he made up his mind. He shouted, Screw you, Chester! Glenn went back to what he was doing before. Chester had showed up, and in about 10 minutes, once Chester was gone, he would go and join the party. He would go and help evil win the war. The devil would beat God. Glenn would beat his brother, and evil would forever dominate good. Glenn Rogers was sure of this. Chapter 43. After Tommy Rogers swiftly killed Gary Hobson by sneaking up behind him and snapping his neck, Tommy returned to the back room, now even more convinced that they would win. He entered the room, and as everyone looked up at him, hoping that it was all went well, Tommy said with a smile on his face, 1 down, 4 to go. Everyone cheered for a few minutes and then got straight back to work. So, what do we do next? Asked Jared. Next, we wait until the devil comes, Tommy replied. How do you know he'll come, and how do you know that he isn't going to wait until we all come out? Because I can sense it. I can sense the devil knows Gary's dead, and I can sense that he's coming as we speak, along with Ray Peck and Glenn Rogers. What about Chester Woodward? Asked Andrew. I don't know about him, replied Tommy. Maybe he's staying back to protect the barn house, but I don't know. Maybe he's scared, Jared, said Jared. Maybe he feels the same way we feel about this, that they have no chance, that we will win. Everyone sat silently thinking about what Jared had just said. For a moment, until eventually Tommy spoke. Well, anyway, I think we need to come up with a plan. We may be able to stop one of them, but how do we defeat 3, especially when the devil and Glenn are 10 times more powerful than Gary? I think most of us will go out there, and it won't just be us out there, but we'll also have the power of God on our side. We could have a few people staying back here. If anyone gets injured, they can come back here and rest. Maybe if anyone can heal them, they could stay here with them. I can, replied Eugene. I think I should stay back. I could heal people with the power that God gave me. Plus, I think I'm just way too old to be out there fighting. Perfect. And maybe 2 more could stay back as well, asked Tommy, to protect this room and make sure no one gets in. I think Tommy, Andrew and Rowan should definitely all go in, Jared suggested. You lot can't die, and you're the most powerful of us out there. That leaves me, Caleb, Roderick and Tracy. I should go since I know a lot about the village and what the devil has to do with it. And also, I knew that it was going to come down to this ever since that night when loads of kids went missing. That leaves 3 people, which I reckon they can decide themselves which 2 should stay back. I want to go, Caleb said. I may not be able to do much, but I'll admit that I can get quite scared a lot. But I want to help as much as possible. And if that means risking my life to defeat evil, then I'm willing to do it. Tommy turned his glance towards Roderick and Tracy and asked, "Are you 2 happy with staying back here?" They both nodded, and Tommy was satisfied. Now all they had to do was wait, and Tommy Rogers was sure that they would win. Chapter 44. "Master!" he shouted. "Master! Master!" he shouted again while running towards them with a can of gasoline in his hand. The devil turned round and saw Glenn Rogers running towards him and Ray Peck. "Ah, Glenn, you're here," the devil said as he met Glenn. Once Glenn had caught up to them, the devil asked, "Where's Chester? Why isn't he here?" "And I thought you were staying back at the barn house to protect it." "I did everything I could to stop him, Master," Glenn answered. "But he just left Sideville. The goddamn coward left Sideville." "Why couldn't you stop him?" asked Ray Peck. "I tried. But then I thought it would be the best to let him go anyway. Why would we want a pathetic coward like Chester to help us fight God? Once we've taken over the world, he's going to regret it," the devil told Glenn and Ray. They continued walking towards the church, Sideville, and talking about how they were going to take over the world and what they'd do to Chester, until suddenly they arrived at their destination, Sideville Church. The entrance held 2 big heavy wooden doors. They were probably about double the size of Glenn, and already Glenn felt small. If some old wooden doors could tower over him and make him feel defeated already, he had no chance against God. The devil stepped forward, opened the doors and walked in. Glenn and Ray followed behind. They walked down the rows of seats and looked around. "I'm here, God!" the devil shouted. "Come out and fight me! I'm going to destroy this church and make Sideville 100% my village. The barn house will become my palace, and you'll have nothing." The devil turned around to face Glenn. "Glenn, set this place alight," and turned back to God. "You can fight back, God, but I'm telling you, you'll regret it." Glenn Rogers unscrewed the lid of the can of gasoline that he carried and started pouring it all over the church. On the floor, on the walls, all over the big wooden floor. For some reason scared Glenn. He would enjoy seeing the door burn more than anything. And once he poured the gasoline almost over everything, every inch of the church, he pulled out his favourite lighter, held it firmly in his right hand, and lit it, getting ready to drop it on the floor. Suddenly, from the back room, a familiar face charged out. It was Tommy Rogers. "So, you finally decided to come out," Glenn said to Tommy and smiled. "Glenn Rogers, you may have a lighter, but I have God on my side." The devil slowly walked towards Tommy and said, "Well, he has me." The devil continued to walk closer to Tommy until the devil stuck out his hand, put it around Tommy's neck and squeezed. "You're weak. I can feel it. I might kill you right now. Get you out of the way so I can deal with God." And that was when it happened. The final battle began when Tommy shouted the signal, "Do it!" And out of nowhere Glenn Rogers was shot in the upper back and fell to the floor. Luckily the lighter went out before it hit the floor. Stood in the corner was Jared Hall, carrying the same heavy shotgun that Gary Hobson used. Ray Peck ran off and took cover while the devil let go of Tommy and looked at Jared. "There he is," the devil said. "The stupid kid who warned everyone about us. The one who always thinks he should be in charge." The devil charged towards Jared angrily. But again, out of nowhere, Ray Peck charged out from where he was hiding and tackled the devil to the ground. "Ray, what are you doing?" The devil shouted and tried to push Ray off, but he couldn't. It was as if he had lost all power. It was as if he was human. Ray eventually got off the devil and walked over to Tommy. The devil looked up at them. "Ray, I thought you were on my side." "I was, but God took the mind control away that you put on me. We're in a church. What did you expect to happen?" Ray replied. Tommy looked at the devil, smiled and said, "It looks like we've set you up pretty well here, doesn't it?" Tommy laughed. The devil looked across to Glenn Rogers, who lay on the floor, and shouted his name. "He's dead," Tommy told the devil. "His soul is probably in hell now, and soon so will you." The devil lay still, looked up and begged God to forgive him. But he was the devil. The devil could never be forgiven by God, and so the light faded, and he was once again down where he always belonged, in the fiery pits of hell. He met Glenn there, and together they burned eternally. Chapter 45. God watched from above, and he was pleased. He watched the devil and Glenn below him burn, and enjoyed watching it. And he watched Tommy Rogers rise. Tommy came to God, and God thanked Tommy for preventing good from becoming extinct. Tommy had defeated all evil, and no one like Glenn would ever be born again. Glenn was one of Satan's children, and now that Satan was gone, he could have no children. God told Tommy to go back to Earth and make sure everything ends well, and make sure everyone lives the rest of their lives without the devil around them. Tommy went back down to Earth, entered the church, and entered the small back room. Everyone was okay, and they were all waiting to see what Tommy would say next. Jared Hall, Axel Clegg, Caleb Hatch, Andrew Keyes, Rowan Stenhouse, Eugene King, Roderick Branson, and Tracy Lindsay all sat around the table. Tommy looked down at them all and spoke. "The next thing we need to do is do what we should have been done a long time ago. Burn down the barn house and then get the hell out of Sideville." "I agree," Jared said immediately, "and I expect everyone else does as well." They did, and so they left the room, pulled out the lighter from the trouser pocket attached to Glenn Rogers' dead body, and all happily stood around the barn house and watched it burn, just as the sun began to rise. The next thing they did was they found a van and got out of Sideville, and after that there was no more Sideville in their life, and no more of the devil. They could all go back to living normally. All of a sudden the sun was fully out, and it was the beginning of the first nice day in ages. Epilogue. They drove for a long time, heading away from Nebraska, going through Ohio, then Illinois, and lived the rest of their lives in Chicago, no longer worrying about the devil. Rowan Stenhouse, Andrew Keyes, and Eugene King went back to heaven and rested in luxury for the rest of eternity. Axel Clegg, Jared Hall, and Caleb Hatch lived together in the same house and went to the same school, just as they had done before. Roderick Branson and Tracy Lindsay moved in together, eventually married, and had 2 kids. And once everyone was back to the way they were, Tommy Rogers was satisfied. Tommy went back to heaven and rested peacefully with Rowan, Andrew, and Eugene, knowing that everything had ended just how he had planned. And that was how a group of school kids, an old man, and a few others defeated the devil. After all, good always beats evil. The end. Sideville, narrated by Stuart Crossley. We hope you enjoyed this audiobook.